Hello friends, welcome to our channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you. The case of Charlotte Mulhall. In March 2005, a gruesome murder occurred in Ireland when a fisherman made a disturbing discovery in a canal. He initially thought he had found a mannequin, but upon closer inspection, he realized it was part of a human leg wearing a sock. He immediately contacted the police. The subsequent investigation revealed many details about this infamous case. The Mulhall family lived in South Dublin, Ireland, consisting of parents John and Kathleen and their 6 children, 3 daughters and 3 sons. The family faced challenges related to alcohol and substance abuse. Both parents drank regularly, and their arguments often became loud and violent, all in front of the children, despite their troubled marriage. John and Kathleen remained together for 27 years. However, by the early 2000s, when their children were grown, they decided to divorce due to financial issues, but continued to live together. At first, it seemed that family life was getting better. However, in 2002, Kathleen introduced her new boyfriend, Farah Swala, who was 14 years her junior. Kathleen's ex-husband, John, felt uncomfortable having a stranger in his home, especially since Farah was now sharing a bed with Kathleen. In response, John decided to leave and move in with his girlfriend. Unfortunately, his new partner soon kicked him out of the house, and he spent a year wandering around Dublin before returning home. Luckily for John, by that time, Kathleen and Farah had moved into a rented flat in another area of Dublin. Farah arrived in Ireland in December 1996 under the false name Shalila Salim. He claimed to be from Somalia and said that his entire family had died in the Civil War. In fact, he was from Kenya and his family still lived there. Farah had a record of minor crimes, and when his deception was discovered, he faced deportation. He successfully appealed the decision. In March 1999, he married a Dublin resident, and they had a child together, which enabled him to obtain Irish citizenship after naturalization. Farah left his wife and began living a chaotic life, relying on odd jobs and petty theft to make ends meet. Farah had a violent past, including an incident in which he abused a mentally disabled Chinese woman, although she bore him a son. Farah escaped punishment for his actions. Reports suggest he harbored a deep hatred for women. In 2002, Farah met Kathleen, and they began a tumultuous relationship. Both were unemployed and relied on odd jobs to make ends meet. Their shared love of alcohol initially bonded them, but over time, their difficult personalities led to frequent arguments, which Kathleen's children often witnessed. Kathleen's eldest daughter, Linda, was born in 1975. She dropped out of school at a young age. By the age of 24, she had 4 children and often forgot the names of her boyfriends due to a series of short-lived relationships. Linda also served a short prison sentence for theft and struggled with alcohol and drug addiction. Linda's younger sister, Charlotte, had her own legal troubles, with around 7 convictions for theft, property damage, escort services, and other misdemeanors. Like Linda, Charlotte also struggled with serious addiction issues. The other siblings also had their own legal problems, and none were considered positive role models. On Sunday, March 20, 2005, Linda invited Charlotte to her apartment. While they were talking in the kitchen, Charlotte suggested that they start celebrating her birthday, which was the next day. At first, Linda refused because she had been abstaining from alcohol for 3 weeks to regain custody of her children, who were in a shelter. However, the temptation to drink became too strong, and half an hour later, they opened a bottle of hard liquor to start the birthday celebration. A few hours later, the sisters decided to visit their mother and her partner, Farah. When they called their mother, they found out that Kathleen and Farah were at a bar in central Dublin. Without hesitation, the sisters joined them. It turned out that Kathleen and Farah had been celebrating St. Patrick's Day for 4 consecutive days. After meeting Linda and Charlotte at the bar, the family did not stay long and decided to continue celebrating at a nearby park. However, Farah got into an argument with some locals, forcing the family to stay out of trouble and decide to go home. The four of them returned to Kathleen and Farah's rented apartment. They prepared food and set the table to celebrate Charlotte's upcoming birthday. When everything was ready, Farah fell asleep to lift Farah's spirits. Kathleen slipped a pill into his drink. Although the ecstasy worked, things did not go as they had expected. A moment later, Linda, who was sitting on the sofa, suddenly felt Farah caress and squeeze her legs. Then he put his arm around her waist and whispered inappropriate words into her ear. At first, Linda did not want to cause a scandal, so she reminded Farah to behave after witnessing Farah's inappropriate actions. Linda openly asked him to take his hands off her, realizing that the situation was escalating. Kathleen and Charlotte began to insult Farah and asked him to behave properly. The argument quickly turned into a fight. Then, Farah grabbed Kathleen, causing her to scream for help to her daughters. In response, Charlotte pulled a knife from her pocket and attacked Farah, seeing her sister Charlotte in danger. Linda rushed to the pantry and grabbed a large iron hammer under the influence of alcohol. Linda lost control of her actions. Soon, the floors, walls, and rooms were in chaos. Meanwhile, the girl's mother, Kathleen, sat in a chair, holding a glass and watching her two daughters attack Farah. Eventually, she grew tired of the commotion and turned her attention to the television, where an entertainment program was playing. After the altercation, the sisters began to understand what had happened, and panic set in. Kathleen stepped in to help and gave Linda and Charlotte a plan for how to dispose of Farah's body. Kathleen said that no one would charge them with murder if Farah's body was not found. So Linda and Charlotte spent the next 5 hours in the bathroom processing the body. During this time, Kathleen took a nap. When Kathleen woke up, she found 7 black plastic bags in the hallway. She called her ex-husband John to tell him about the nightmare that had unfolded in their rented apartment. John was skeptical and did not believe her at first. However, when he arrived and saw the scene from the front door, he realized it was no joke. He declared that he would not participate and went home. After a short break, Kathleen and her 2 daughters began a thorough cleaning of the apartment. They used brooms and several gallons of bleach to meticulously wipe down every surface. At noon on March 21, Kathleen, Linda, and Charlotte left the rented apartment, each carrying a sports bag containing black trash bags. They walked to the nearest river channel and, unnoticed, threw 6 black bags into the water. The women then went to a restaurant. Afterward, they took a bus for about an hour to the city center. Once there, they stopped at a large store, browsed several areas, withdrew money from an ATM, and went to a park. In the park, they dug a shallow hole with a knife and buried the last bag. They eventually threw the knife and hammer into a nearby pond before returning home. Over the next few days, Kathleen and her daughters focused on cleaning the rental apartment. Kathleen bought a large amount of cleaning supplies. She later admitted that there was a terrible, nauseating smell in the room that no cleaning product could remove. Kathleen and Charlotte coped with the smell by drinking and using drugs to forget it. However, Linda was very distressed, crying constantly and unable to calm down. 10 days later, one of the bags that Kathleen and her daughters had thrown into the Dublin Canal floated to the surface. A local fisherman discovered it and quickly called the police to report the incident. When the police arrived, they drained the canal, and divers searched the area, eventually finding 6 black bags containing the man's body. A forensic expert determined that the man had suffered 28 injuries due to the brutal nature of the case. The police initially speculated that he may have died during a witchcraft ritual, but later ruled this theory out after consulting with experts. The police knew they needed to solve the case by identifying the victim. However, the DNA database did not have any matches for the body. Therefore, officers decided to take a different approach. They shared descriptions and photos of the items found in the victim's bag through social media. Among these items, was a torn T-shirt with the logo of an Irish football club. This shirt helped identify the victim as Farah Swaleh Noor. As one of his old friends from Somalia recognized it, this friend also mentioned that Farah had been missing for several weeks and had stopped answering calls. Police discovered that Farah had been living with a girlfriend named Kathleen Mulhall for the past few years. This information prompted further investigation. Samolit received a cash reward for helping to locate Kathleen, while two others, Linda and Charlotte, were brought in for questioning. All three denied any involvement, and the police had no evidence to charge the women. So they were released the same day. In July 2005, one of Kathleen's sons, who was serving time in prison for a traffic violation, informed a guard that his mother and sisters had killed Farah. He claimed that during a prison visit, Kathleen had confessed to the crime to him. Following this revelation, the police searched Kathleen's apartment and discovered traces of Farah's blood. In August 2005, Kathleen, Linda, and Charlotte were again questioned at the police station. They maintained their innocence, and the interrogation lasted 12 hours. Kathleen and her two daughters, Linda and Charlotte, were then released. During this time, Linda, who was extremely remorseful, called the police at the end of August and confessed to the crime, leading them to the park where they had buried a black bag that eventually contained Farah's body. However, it is believed that the black bag was unearthed and moved to another location shortly after Linda's confession. In September 2005, Kathleen Mulhall fled to England. In December 2005, Linda and Charlotte were arrested and charged with murder. Shortly afterward, their biological father, John, who was looking after the four children on his own, died. It is believed that he had nothing to do with the crime. Linda and Charlotte's trial began in October 2006, with Linda facing a charge of manslaughter and Charlotte charged with attempted murder. During the trial, both women claimed they acted in self-defense, maintained their innocence, and stated that they were trying to protect their mother. After a brief deliberation, the jury found Charlotte Mulhall and Linda Mulhall guilty. The judge sentenced Linda to 15 years in prison, while Charlotte received a life sentence. It was reported that both sisters had exhibited poor behavior while incarcerated in a women's prison in Dublin. One day, Linda injured her hand and spent several weeks in the hospital. Charlotte attracted media attention after a photograph was released of Charlotte attacking a male prisoner. The incident led to increased security measures at all prisons in Ireland, and Charlotte was subsequently transferred to a higher security facility in Limerick. Kathleen Mulhall's story began when she fled Ireland in September 2005 and assumed a new identity in the UK. However, in January 2008, a reporter discovered her location and reported her to the police. As a result, Kathleen was forced to return to Ireland, where she faced numerous charges. She confessed to helping her daughters dispose of their bodies and clean their apartment. In May 2009, Kathleen was sentenced to 5 years in prison, but was released after serving only 2 years. After her release in October 2011, she returned to the UK and moved in with her son, James. At that time, James's family consisted of his 6 children and the 4 children of his sister, Linda. He adopted Linda's children after she was arrested. After Kathleen arrived, tensions rose between James and his live-in girlfriend, eventually leading to an incident in which he assaulted her and was subsequently imprisoned. Kathleen later suffered severe kidney failure and underwent an organ transplant in Dublin. She now lives in her hometown, where she continues to receive treatment. Linda was released early from her sentence that same year. She now lives with her children and her new partner. Linda does not give interviews to journalists. In a recent statement to the media, she said, "She have served my sentence. Let she live in peace after all. This is she personal life, and it is none of your." Since March 2023, Charlotte has been allowed to leave prison for 1 day. Under close supervision by guards, she may soon be eligible for parole.
Mike Reischl married his first wife, Dee Hoffman, in 1979 while they were students at the University of Florida in Gainesville. Mike seemed to have it all. From an early age, Mike showed outstanding qualities. He was a dedicated Boy Scout, nearing the rank of Eagle Scout, and an altar boy, reflecting strong moral values. At the University of Florida, he joined a fraternity, developing athletic skills and excelling in academics. He later earned a Master of Business Administration from the University of Miami, paving the way for professional success. Dee, his wife, noted that Mike was a supportive husband who never physically abused her. However, their relationship had reached a breaking point. They had 2 daughters, Caroline and Kate, whom Mike loved deeply. Despite his accomplishments, he spent long hours traveling for work, causing his daughters to become accustomed to his absence during their early years. After 25 years of marriage, Dee informed Mike that she wanted a divorce. She then moved out of their home to provide their daughters, Caroline and Kate, a familiar place to return to during their college breaks. At 49, Mike found himself single for the first time in many years and wanted to find love again. In the mid-2000s, as internet dating became popular, he created a profile on Match and soon connected with Susan O'Brien Reischl, a 38-year-old Hispanic nurse. As their relationship developed, Mike and Susan enjoyed great dates and trips together. Shortly after they met, Susan moved into Mike's home, taking over the space that had been Dee's. When Caroline first met Susan, she was worried about her father's new girlfriend. Caroline was surprised by how much Susan drank at their first meeting. Despite having several martinis, Susan was able to walk and talk normally. This behavior was unusual for Caroline, raising concerns in her mind. In 2007, despite Caroline's concerns, Mike and Susan got married. This marked a significant change in their lives, as Susan stopped working and Mike stopped traveling for his job. Instead, he bought a local business called Ocala Dental Care, which became central to their daily lives. To outsiders, Mike and Susan seemed like the perfect couple. They lived in an affluent neighborhood in Alachua County, Florida, known as Hiley Plantation, and often joked about their seemingly ideal life together. However, underneath this facade, they were facing serious challenges in their marriage. In the summer of 2007, Mike proposed a prenuptial agreement to Susan, which surprised their friends and family. They had always been seen as a strong and united couple. What led Mike to suggest a prenup? The turning point was an incident at one of his daughter's parties. Susan, who had a fiery personality, used foul language in front of Mike's daughter, leading to an intense argument. This incident prompted Mike to think about protecting his assets in case their marriage ended in divorce. Mike and Susan seemed financially secure, but there were hidden problems. Susan revealed to Mike that she had $35,000 in credit card debt, which worried him greatly. One significant issue in their relationship was Susan's negative feelings toward Mike's daughters. Caroline mentioned that the only time she could talk to her father was when he was alone in his car. Susan's dislike for his daughters created a barrier, preventing Caroline from having meaningful discussions with her father. Even though Mike and Susan encountered challenges, their relationship appeared to improve, at least outwardly. In 2016, when Caroline announced her engagement, Susan became very involved and wanted to play a major role in planning the wedding. She insisted on hosting a bridal shower for Caroline, even though this is usually a responsibility of the bride's mother or sister. While organizing the shower, Susan intentionally left out Caroline's mother's friends from the guest list but made sure to invite her own family and friends. Although it was somewhat unusual for Susan to be so heavily involved, Caroline ultimately found the shower enjoyable, appreciating the effort Susan put in to make it fun and memorable. When Caroline was choosing her wedding dress, Susan went with her to the bridal boutique. They looked at various dresses together until Caroline found one she loved. Susan even used her credit card to pay for the $1,000 gown. In November 2017, Caroline married at Oheka Castle in Long Island, with 160 guests in attendance. The wedding was opulent and had the grandeur fit for royalty. Before Mike walked his daughter Caroline down the aisle, she noticed a strange mark on his face. When Caroline asked him about it, Mike dismissed her concerns, wanting to avoid upsetting her on such an important day. 3 weeks after the wedding, Mike revealed to Caroline that the mark had become a long white scar, which was the result of physical abuse by his wife, Susan. He shared that Susan had been arrested for domestic battery after she became violent while drunk. Susan, on the other hand, described the incident differently. She claimed that after Caroline's wedding, Mike told her that the event had gone $150,000 over budget, which made her very angry. This led to a heated argument between them. During the confrontation, Susan threw her phone at Mike and pushed him in an attempt to calm things down. Ironically, it was Susan who called 911 to report the situation. She said she intended to leave for their beach condo to help defuse things, but she took too long to depart. Consequently, when she hadn't left the house, the police arrested her. The court later mandated that Susan stay away from Mike, and she sought help for Susan's, counseling, and anger management. After some time, Mike chose not to file charges against Susan, leading to the case being dropped. Susan moved out of their home and into a condo in Ponte Vedra. While this gave her a break from the couple's ongoing conflicts, it was temporary. On February 3, 2018, at 3:30 a.m., Mike Reischel made a disturbing call to 911 from his home in Gainesville, Florida. He told the dispatcher that someone had entered his house and that his wife, Susan, was bleeding heavily. When the police arrived, they found Susan seriously injured on the bed in the master bedroom. Medics were called immediately, and they rushed her to the nearest hospital. As she was taken into surgery, doctors worked hard to save her life. She was in critical condition, and her chances of survival were slim. Meanwhile, a detective arrived at Mike's home, which had been secured as a crime scene. He began investigating, carefully looking for any clues. What he discovered was alarming. In the master bedroom, there was a large amount of blood on the bed and a bloody bent knife, but no signs of forced entry through doors or windows. To understand what happened, the detective reviewed security camera footage from Mike's house. However, after examining the footage, he found no one leaving the house. Susan miraculously survived the attack but suffered serious injuries to her wrist, stomach, and neck. Once she regained consciousness in the hospital, she shared a startling account with the detectives investigating the case. Susan revealed that there had been no intruder. Instead, it was Mike who had attacked her. She claimed Mike had fabricated a story about someone breaking into their home and assaulting them. Susan explained that they had begun arguing during dinner at a local restaurant and decided to return home in separate cars. When she arrived home, she went straight to bed. As she was falling asleep, she suddenly felt a sharp stabbing pain. When she opened her eyes, she found Mike standing over her, holding a knife. Overcome with panic, she shouted, "Michael, you are going to kill me." To her horror, Mike responded, "That's exactly what I want to do." Susan's cries for help went ignored as Mike continued to stab her, leaving her in extreme pain and covered in blood. For an hour, she lay in bed, bleeding heavily and terrified for her life. Mike told her that he wouldn't kill her if she agreed to claim that an intruder had broken into their home and attacked her. Desperate to survive, Susan reluctantly went along with his story. He then changed his clothes and called 911, pretending that a robbery had happened. Mike Reischel was arrested for the attempted murder of his wife, Susan. The news shocked many, including his ex-wife, Dee, and his daughters. Dee, who had divorced Mike years ago, found it hard to believe the allegations. She had never seen any signs of violence during their marriage and couldn't wrap her head around the accusation against her former husband. Similarly, Caroline and Kate were stunned by their father's arrest. They had always viewed Mike as a kind and generous man. The idea that he could hurt their stepmother was unimaginable. As events progressed, Mike faced more charges alongside the attempted murder charge. He was indicted for false imprisonment, obstruction, and tampering with evidence. These new charges made the situation more complex and serious. Because of Mike's wealth, the judge set a bond of $2.5 million for these additional charges, but no bond was allowed for the attempted murder charge due to its severe nature. Mike's arrest shocked the community. Many who knew him and his family struggled to reconcile their views of him with the serious charges he was facing. In June 2018, while awaiting trial in jail for the attempted murder of Susan O'Brien Rayashel, Michael Rayashel was accused of hiring a hitman to kill his wife. According to sources, Rayashel contacted Roderick Jermaine McCullum, a 33-year-old inmate, to plot Susan's murder for $100,000, providing details about Susan's home and a floor plan. McCullum was also charged with conspiracy, but the case was sealed due to the ongoing investigation. Eventually, the charges were dismissed, and Mike's daughter Caroline called the idea so absurd it was laughable. It is important to note that in November 2017, Susan was arrested for domestic violence after throwing a phone and punching Mike in the arm during an argument over Caroline's wedding expenses. Mike reported to the police that Susan had a drinking problem and had repeatedly abused him, which led to a restraining order. Susan denies the charges of violence, and the case was dropped when Mike chose not to pursue Susan's prosecution. The 2019 trial shed light on the troubled relationship between Mike and Susan. During the proceedings, Mike described their marriage as strained and tumultuous. He explained that they rarely had visitors at their home, mainly because Susan was opposed to Mike inviting his friends from his former university's advisory board. Another source of conflict was Mike's involvement in charitable activities. He stated that while he enjoyed making donations, this sometimes led to disagreements with Susan. Mike mentioned that she would frequently threaten to divorce him if he attended committee meetings, country club events, or made donations without her approval. Mike expressed that he struggled with conflicts regarding charitable contributions, while Susan's spending habits appeared to go unchecked. He stated that Susan frequently bought clothing and jewelry without discussing it with him. This difference in how they managed their finances contributed to the stress in their marriage, leaving Mike feeling frustrated and overwhelmed by their ongoing financial difficulties. Additionally, he testified that Susan sometimes resorted to violence to resolve disputes. For instance, in July 2016, he claimed that Susan threw a wine bottle at him from the top of the stairs, hitting his shoulders. This was not an isolated incident. He mentioned other times when she threw vases and heavy mugs at him. He did take pictures of his injuries and shared them with his daughter, Caroline. Mike consistently insisted during the trial that, despite experiencing abuse, he loved his wife and wished to stay married to her. However, he felt he had to tread carefully around her, always worried about her reactions. On February 3, 2018, Mike invited Susan to dinner, hoping they could improve their relationship. He chose their favorite steakhouse, believing a change of environment and a romantic setting might help. Unfortunately, during dinner, Mike received a text from his daughter, Caroline, which upset Susan. The atmosphere turned awkward and tense, and Susan's anger grew, prompting her to leave the restaurant in an Uber. After the meal, Mike followed her in his car. On their way home, Susan texted Mike, implying she thought Caroline would sabotage any future relationship he had. When Susan and Mike returned home that night, they communicated through text messages rather than speaking. Susan let Mike know that she was going to file for divorce and would be leaving the next morning. At around 10:13 p.m., she sent him one last message about his serious as Susan's with boundaries regarding his daughter. While Susan was alone in the guest room, Mike unexpectedly entered and attacked her. She felt pressure in her upper abdomen and noticed a knife in his hand. Susan claimed that Mike insisted they were not getting a divorce and described a violent struggle during which he sliced her left thumb. She stated that he stabbed her multiple times and slashed at her wrists, leaving her with serious injuries. She testified about losing a significant amount of blood, which caused her to vomit and lose control of her muscles and bodily functions. Mike reportedly told her that he would stay with her until she died. However, Mike provided a different account of the events. He said that he entered the bedroom and saw Susan on the bed with a knife. A fight broke out over the knife, which resulted in Susan being fatally stabbed in the stomach as they fell onto the bed. Mike, however, did not clarify how Susan also sustained stab wounds to her neck and thumb during the incident. In his testimony, Mike said he meant to call 911 for help after accidentally injuring Susan in the struggle. However, Susan reportedly asked him not to make the call because she was afraid of being arrested again for domestic violence. According to Mike, They lay together as she bled for several hours. The prosecution argues that if Mike's account is accurate, he and Susan were in a blood-soaked bedroom filled with vomit and human waste. Mike reported that at 3 a.m., their dog entered the messy bedroom, which led him to get out of bed to attend to the dog. During this time, Susan took a knife and harmed her wrists, allegedly saying she was afraid of going to jail. Mike asserted that he reassured Susan he wouldn't get her arrested and instead chose to lie to the police, claiming he would protect her. They then agreed on a fake robbery to call the emergency services. As part of his plan, Mike disabled the security cameras to make it look like a break-in occurred at around 2:42 a.m. At 3:30 a.m. on February 3rd, he called 911 and turned the cameras back on. The prosecution argued that Mike's actions showed he intended to harm Susan. They claimed that his willingness to lie about what happened and manipulate the surveillance footage indicated he was trying to hide his involvement in the crime. In contrast, the defense argued that Mike acted out of a desire to protect his wife. They asserted that Susan's attempted suicide stemmed from her mental health as Susan's and that Mike was trying to save her when he turned off the camera and lied to the police. A bloodstain pattern analyst testified in Mike's defense, stating that he reviewed medical records supporting Mike's account. The analyst explained that if Susan had cut her wrist around 10 p.m., as she said, she would have died from blood loss. However, if Mike's version of events was accurate, it was more plausible that she survived the incident since medical help arrived shortly afterward. The prosecution dismissed Mike's claims about wanting to reconcile with his wife. They presented evidence showing that Mike had visited 3 dating websites, suggesting he was not serious about mending their relationship. In response, Mike's defense pointed out that he had also looked at websites aimed at helping battered husbands. After a 9-day trial, the jury deliberated for 4 hours before returning with a guilty verdict for Mike Reischel on attempted first-degree murder and other charges. In December 2019, he was sentenced, but Susan chose not to attend the hearing. Mike's daughter, Caroline, spoke in court, expressing her pride in being his daughter. She shared how compassionate and selfless Mike had been throughout the years, always prioritizing others. Several of Mike's friends also spoke up, describing him as kind, gentle, and a true gentleman. Although the prosecution sought a 50-year sentence, the judge decided to impose a 30-year sentence on Mike. Considering Mike's age at the time of sentencing, it's probable that he will spend the rest of his life in prison. Timothy Wiltsey was born on August 6, 1985. His family called him Timmy. By 1991, when he was 5 years old, he lived with his mother, Michelle Ludzinski, in the small town of South Amboy, New Jersey. On Memorial Day weekend, which also marked the end of the school year, Timothy and Michelle went to a carnival at an amusement park in the nearby town of Sayreville. On May 25, 1991, Michelle's 14-year-old niece, Jennifer Blair Dilcher, and her mother came to visit. However, their plans changed, and they could not go to the carnival together. Michelle and Timothy arrived at the park around 7 p.m. Michelle bought several tickets for the rides, and then they walked over to a soda machine. While she turned away for a few minutes to pay for the drinks, Timothy disappeared. Jennifer was supposed to be picked up by her mother's friend, who was her babysitter. They arrived 15 minutes late and found Michelle frantically looking for her son. As soon as she saw Jennifer and the nanny, Michelle explained that she had been momentarily distracted. Now her son was missing. The group decided to split up and search for him. Jennifer and her nanny quickly found a police officer in the park and asked for assistance. Meanwhile, Michelle spoke to the officer, describing her son Timothy as wearing a tank top, shorts, and sneakers with Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles on them. She filed a report about Timothy's disappearance, prompting the officer to start searching the park. The celebration was paused, and the area was cordoned off for a thorough investigation. That evening, the search area widened to include nearby forests and beyond. Finding Timothy quickly was proving difficult. Sadly, there were no surveillance cameras in the area at the time. The following day, multiple search teams were sent out. The local authorities provided a helicopter and a team of divers to check 2 nearby ponds. Hundreds of volunteers joined the search and rescue efforts, covering a large area. Many law enforcement officers worked alongside them in the park and its surroundings over the next few days, but they were unable to locate Timothy. During this difficult time, Michelle's family supported her. According to her father and sister, she appeared to be a devastated mother. Michelle never imagined that such a tragedy could happen to her. Just a few weeks earlier, she had bought a graduation dress for her child's kindergarten ceremony. They were getting ready for the celebration and planning a trip to visit Michelle's sister in Florida for the holidays. Everything seemed normal. Despite facing financial challenges, Michelle did not want to rely solely on government assistance. She continued to work and received some support from her family. George Wiltsey, the boy's father, had no relationship with him. Michelle met George after she dropped out of school. She initially lived with her parents on Long Island before choosing to start a family with him. They dated for about 3 years and then moved to New Jersey. While in New Jersey, Michelle became pregnant and gave birth to Timothy in 1985, with George being 18 and Michelle 17 at the time. They decided to expand their family, but eventually moved to George's home state of Iowa. Unfortunately, they struggled to create a stable life together. 6 months after the move, Michelle returned to New Jersey, first living with her sister and her husband. Later, she moved into a rented apartment with Timothy and cut all ties with George. Michelle didn't reveal why she and George broke up, but she prevented him from seeing their son afterward. George didn't provide child support, and Michelle rejected his assistance. She even sent back all the items he mailed for their son. People who knew them suspected that banned substance use might have played a role in their breakup, and George had physically assaulted Michelle at least once. George, however, argued that Michelle longed for New Jersey and her family, which led her to distance herself from him. In the spring of 1991, Michelle, a 23-year-old single mother, was raising her 5-year-old son on her own. She was the only provider for both of them and was determined to create a stable life, which meant she often had to switch jobs. However, her limited education made it difficult to maintain consistent employment. Over time, she worked as a legal assistant, a secretary, and in various retail positions, sometimes juggling 2 jobs at once. Her father helped by sending her money for housing, which was crucial for their survival. Managing everything while caring for a young child was challenging. Michelle frequently needed assistance from family and friends to look after her son while she worked. When no one could help, she would bring him along, which often made her late for work. This tardiness harmed her reputation and led to her being fired from jobs. In January 1990, her support network took a hit when her sister and brother-in-law, who had been a key source of help, moved to Florida. Feeling overwhelmed and without adequate support, Michelle made the difficult decision to send her son to live with her brother in Minnesota for 2 months. This would allow her to save money for his education. Many people who knew Michelle described her as a dedicated mother who devoted all her free time to her son, ensuring he had everything he needed. They often went hiking together and worked on school preparations at home. However, after her son went missing, some critics emerged. They pointed out that her son, Tim, created tension in her romantic relationships. Many of the men she dated were reluctant to take on the responsibility of raising another person's child, which often led to the end of their relationships with her. In her frustration, Michelle started to see her son as a burden. One of her former partners described her as an immature mother who acted more like Timothy's older sister than a parent, saying she often neglected the child's needs. One day, Timothy entered a neighbor's yard and was bitten by the neighbor's dog, requiring 72 stitches on his face. This happened despite the neighbor warning Michelle to supervise her son to keep him off his property. A friend of Timothy's noted that Timothy was very afraid of Michelle's last boyfriend, Fred Bruno. Even though Fred left a negative impression on many, Michelle did not take her son's fears seriously. The friend even speculated that Fred might be involved in Timothy's disappearance. Initially, Timothy's biological father was considered a primary suspect. He had been estranged from Michelle and was prohibited from contacting his son, which gave him a potential motive for kidnapping Tim. Authorities thoroughly searched the father's home but found no evidence of Tim. He passed a polygraph test and had a strong alibi. Fred Bruno was also investigated but was quickly ruled out as a suspect. When the Federal Bureau of Investigation, FBI, became involved in the search for Tim, they began to question Michelle Ludzinski's true identity. Her behavior appeared odd. She did not seem genuinely worried about her son's disappearance. Michelle was experiencing financial issues and difficulties. For many young single mothers, this ongoing stress can sometimes lead to thoughts of abandoning their child, whom they may view as a major source of their problems. Some mothers choose to place their children with relatives, some give up their parental rights, and tragically, some even harm their children. As a result, Michelle quickly became a primary suspect in the case of her son's disappearance or potential murder. Authorities were eager to find out what she had done to him. Just days after Timothy went missing, she took a lie detector test but failed. A week later, she took another test and failed again. The expert who conducted the tests noted that Michelle showed significant emotional fluctuations, avoided eye contact, and seemed more focused on her own situation than on her child's well-being. Several clear signs of deception were observed, and investigators later found out that Michelle had lied to her close friends, claiming she had passed the lie detector test. The situation attracted a lot of public attention. Family members and neighbors also noticed that Michelle didn't express much emotion or seem to grieve for her missing child. During a press conference where she announced her son's disappearance and asked for help, many people felt she seemed too calm, speaking in a flat tone that resembled reading from a script. This observation increased suspicion. Although her relatives insisted she was deeply affected and just kept her emotions in check because of her personality, the inconsistencies in her behavior raised concerns. Michelle's account of her child's disappearance was inconsistent and raised suspicions. In the month after Timothy went missing, she kept adding more details to her story during each interaction with the police. Her narrative changed drastically. What initially seemed like a case of carelessness transformed into a kidnapping involving different attackers, first two men, then a man and a woman. This left law enforcement officials uncertain about the truth. Michelle believed her son was being held captive. She based this belief on a call from an anonymous individual who claimed that Timothy would be returned within a month if she remained calm. This is why she seemed so self-assured. Although this information couldn't be verified, it raised questions about why she would fabricate such a story. Her odd behavior prompted detectives to investigate her more closely. Given the time that had passed since Timothy's disappearance, they suspected he might not be found alive. Investigators checked if Michelle had received any large money transfers related to a potential sale of her son, but found no significant transactions, and her financial situation had not changed. They searched her home and car, initially suspecting that she might have harmed her son, but found no blood evidence. They went further and used luminol to detect any hidden blood stains, but again found nothing. However, Michelle's history of dishonesty led detectives and even her friends to doubt her credibility. One friend agreed to have her card tapped to try to extract a confession, but this attempt failed. Over the next 11 months, no damaging recordings or admissions were made, yet Michelle continued to offer inconsistent accounts of events. 3 extensive interviews were conducted, but aside from providing conflicting information, she did not give any new leads. Michelle struggled to understand why the detectives were so focused on her and remained convinced that her son was alive and would come back. In October 1991, an important discovery was made. A school teacher walking in the industrial area near the Raritan River found a sneaker that had a picture of the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles on it. It was known that Timothy loved these characters. A passerby, who had seen news reports about Timothy's disappearance, remembered that just before he went missing, Michelle had bought him similar shoes. Believing there might be a connection, the passerby contacted law enforcement for further investigation. When the sneaker was first shown to Michelle, she denied it was the same shoe she had bought for her son and listed several identifying features. However, she later hesitated and suggested that the shoe could possibly belong to Tim. This change in her story raised suspicion. The police continued their investigation and found that Michelle had previously worked at the industrial complex close to where a sneaker were discovered, coinciding with the time when Timothy went missing. Notably, she had not mentioned this to the detectives. Colleagues reported that her behavior changed after Timothy's disappearance. She frequently took walks by the stream bank, her workplace, during lunch breaks without providing any explanation. After the first sneaker was found, concerning rumors began to spread, which led FBI agents to investigate the area more thoroughly. During a search along the stream bank, investigators found a skull and 10 other bones in and around a truck tire that had been dredged from the bottom of Red Root Creek. These were located near pieces of the boy's clothing, a pillowcase, a Ninja Turtles balloon, and a blue and white blanket that were buried in an embankment 6.1 meters from the creek bed where the bones were discovered. Law enforcement agencies received these remains on April 23, 1992. Strikingly, Michelle showed no emotional response when informed about this discovery. Fibers and hair taken from the blanket were analyzed, but they did not match Michelle's hair, Timothy's, or anyone from her family. The child's body was also examined closely, and dental records confirmed that the skull belonged to Tim. However, due to the missing skeletal bones and the complete decomposition of soft tissue, the medical examiner could not determine the cause of the child's death. By this time, Michelle had begun a new chapter in her life, moving to a neighboring state as if nothing had happened. At that point, there was no evidence linking her to the alleged murder, and the investigation went cold. However, more strange events involving her were yet to unfold. In January 1994, Michelle found herself back in the news. She made national headlines by sharing a terrifying story about how 2 federal agents kidnapped her outside her home. They threatened her with a gun, forced her into a car, and drove her to Detroit, where they eventually let her go. She managed to find her way back home on her own. Michelle reached out to the Federal Bureau of Investigation, reporting that 2 men had called her multiple times, threatening her while pretending to be agents. They insisted that she cooperate and confess to Timothy's murder. Despite their pressure, Michelle maintained her innocence, which she claimed resulted in her kidnapping. Her story captured national attention, shocking the public. Opinions were sharply divided. Some people were furious and called for the authorities to stop harassing her, while others supported the agents' unorthodox methods to extract a confession from a woman they suspected of killing her son. When she returned from Detroit, a note appeared on her door that read, "It's not over." It was thought that she had placed this note herself to support her fabricated kidnapping narrative. Michelle admitted to faking her own kidnapping by taking a bus to Detroit but refused to discuss her conflicting accounts of Timmy's disappearance any further. In March 1995, she was sentenced to 6 months of house arrest and 3 years of probation for the FBI hoax. The Sayreville police believed she staged the kidnapping to avoid being implicated in an investigation of her boyfriend, a police officer from neighboring Union County, who had been accused of improperly checking the license plates of cars that Michelle claimed were following her. In May, the police department decided not to take any action against him in relation to the charges. In 1997, while pregnant with her second child, Michelle pleaded guilty to stealing a computer from a former employer to give to her police officer boyfriend as a Christmas present. Upon receiving the computer, he realized it had been stolen and reported it. She was subsequently sentenced to house arrest for 4 months and was also placed on probation for an additional 3 years. Meanwhile, Timothy's case remained unsolved and had reached a dead end, with even FBI agents unable to make progress. The technology available in the 1990s did not permit a detailed analysis of the evidence needed to obtain physical proof against Timothy's biological mother. Shortly after her sentence was handed down in 1998, Michelle moved to Florida, and in 1999, she relocated to Apple Valley, Minnesota, a suburb of Minneapolis, where she married in 2001 and started a new family. Timothy was not forgotten. In the early 2010s, the case file and evidence were still stored as they were, and the district attorney's office did little more than follow up on occasional tips. After a tip around the 20th anniversary of Timothy Wiltsey's disappearance, which had nothing to do with the case, Scott Crocco, an investigator with the office, decided it was time to revisit the investigation and see if there was anything that could help solve the case. He focused on the blanket. Investigators reasoned that the boy would not have carried a large blanket through the carnival on the humid 90 degrees Fahrenheit day he went missing. They concluded that the blanket had been taken from Ladzinski's South Amboy home to cover the boy after he died, even though she denied ever having owned such a blanket. Detectives believe that the blanket should have been recognized by people who had interacted with Michelle before her child's murder and then reconnected with her relatives and friends afterward. Several witnesses, including former co-workers, reported seeing Michelle using the blanket. In the early 2000s, Michelle lived in Minnesota with her new husband and their son. After their marriage ended in 2003, Michelle moved to Florida while pregnant with her third child. In Florida, she gave birth, purchased a home, settled in with her 2 children, and worked as a paralegal at a law firm. She kept photos of her firstborn son, who had passed away, to honor his memory and ensured her children knew he had existed. The investigation into his death is ongoing. Krakow interviewed Jennifer Blair Dilcher, the niece who met Michelle at the carnival shortly after Michelle said she couldn't find her son. In the years that followed, Jennifer, who had initially supported her aunt, married and had 2 children of her own, but also became addicted to banned substance. She went to Florida for rehab, leaving the children with Michelle during that time. While Jennifer was in the program, Michelle and Jennifer's mother decided that Jennifer's condition was serious enough that they could not return the children after she completed the program, so they placed them with Jennifer's mother-in-law, whom Jennifer greatly disliked. It took Jennifer some time to regain custody of the children, and she considered Michelle's decision a betrayal. At Krakow's behest, Jennifer began contacting her aunt on Facebook about the case, hoping that Michelle might confess or make some incriminating statement. After being unsuccessful, Krakow showed Jennifer blankets, pillowcases, and a red jacket. She immediately told him that the blanket had been in Michelle's apartment and that Timothy had wrapped himself in it during her babysitting sessions. 2 other women who helped care for Timothy also recognized the blanket. This evidence established a crucial connection. It became evident that the blanket couldn't have been mistakenly left near the body, suggesting that Michelle had intentionally brought it to the industrial complex, thinking the body would remain undiscovered there. On August 6, 2014, what would have been Timmy's 29th birthday, following a sealed grand jury indictment, Michelle Ladzinski was arrested in Florida and charged with his son's murder. Prosecutors believed they had sufficient evidence to secure a conviction for first-degree murder. The hearings drew a crowd of concerned individuals, and opinions were mixed. The trial was difficult and stretched from March to May 2016. The only new evidence presented was the testimony of several witnesses stating that the blanket found near the boy belonged to his mother. Jennifer testified at her aunt's trial, claiming she saw the blanket in Michelle's home and believed in Michelle's guilt. However, several witnesses said they had never seen the blanket in Michelle's home, and there were no photographs showing it with her and the boy. Fibers and hairs taken from the blanket were re-examined, providing more detailed analyses than the microscopic tests done in 1991. Unfortunately, these results showed that none of the hairs belonged to Michelle or Tim. Additionally, the prosecution pointed to Michelle's strange behavior. Her inconsistent statements and her calmness when discussing Timothy seemed to suggest her involvement. However, the defense attorney effectively argued that this evidence was insufficient to label the defendant a murderer. The location where the remains were found was only a few hundred meters from the building where Michelle Ladzinski worked at that time. It was an inconspicuous area that almost no one visited. Michelle was aware of this and may have deliberately chosen this place to hide the body. The prosecutor was convinced that there was too much circumstantial evidence, all of which pointed to the boy's mother. However, Michelle's lawyer argued that from May 25, 1991 to April 1992, when the body was discovered, several major storms had occurred. Independent experts confirmed that the Red Root stream, near which the skull and belongings were found, had overflowed its banks. It was located not far from the amusement park where Timothy disappeared, so the water could have carried evidence to that location. This was indirectly supported by the fact that many fragments of the boy's skeleton were never found. The prosecutor's approach had evolved since the investigation in the 1990s. They argued that Timothy had never gone to the amusement park. He had actually been missing long before then. A new theory was presented to the jury. Michelle had gone to the park alone after disposing of her son and had asked relatives to pretend an abduction had occurred. Meanwhile, Michelle's testimony kept changing. The defense attorney provided an explanation for Michelle's unusual behavior. An independent psychiatric evaluation revealed that she has antisocial personality disorder, which may have contributed to her confusing and inconsistent stories. The lawyer noted that the disorder became particularly evident in 1991, right after her son went missing. This was used to explain her strange actions, which were seen as responses to extreme stress and trauma. The evaluation confirmed the diagnosis, with evidence suggesting troubling behaviors. Consequently, the lawyer argued that Michelle's dishonest claims, including her stories about kidnapping, were a result of her illness. At trial, the prosecution argued that Michelle had murdered her son. They claimed that due to giving birth at a very young age, she faced ongoing financial and emotional challenges. Timothy had grown up during a particularly tough time in Michelle's life. Timothy did not have a relationship with his father, George. Michelle kept George from having contact with him and consistently turned down any offers of assistance. With no support system, she struggled to improve her circumstances, and her relationships with men were unsuccessful, which further complicated her situation. The Lodzinski family was divided during the hearings. Michelle's father and sister believed she was a good mother, while her brother and niece, Jennifer, suggested she may have been involved in Timothy's death. Michelle's defense also presented testimony from an Arizona man who claimed that a former inmate from Georgia had confessed to him that he had abused and killed a young boy somewhere near Atlanta. The testimony did not provide any evidence that the man was in the Sayreville area at the time of Timothy Wiltsey's disappearance, and the man himself denied this on the stand. Prosecutors further questioned the Arizona man's credibility by pointing out that he had previously accused another man of assaulting and abusing him. Another witness testified for the defense about a possible third party, a resident of an apartment complex near the festival, who saw several men throw something about 4 feet long, wrapped in white cloth, into the trunk of a car before driving away quickly without turning on the headlights. After hearing testimony from 68 witnesses, the jury began deliberating in May. The next day, a week before the 25th anniversary of Timothy's disappearance, the jury returned a guilty verdict for first-degree murder. Sentencing was scheduled for August 2016 but was postponed as Michelle's attorneys appealed the judge's earlier rulings regarding jury misconduct and insufficient evidence. Shortly thereafter, the defense moved for a judgment of default, requesting the judge to vacate the conviction and acquit her on the grounds that the evidence was insufficient for a reasonable jury to convict. The judge denied this motion, and in January 2017, he sentenced Michelle Lodzinski to 30 years in state prison without the possibility of parole. After the trial, the jury told reporters that their opinions were mixed. Not all of them believed she was guilty. They were particularly influenced by the unusual testimony from Michelle, which implied that she was hiding something. However, they questioned why she would do that if she were innocent. Immediately after, Michelle's defense team approached the case with renewed determination. They aimed to have her acquitted, emphasizing that there was no physical evidence linking her to Timothy's death. Extensive checks and tests were conducted, but there were no traces of the boy's blood or any indication that Michelle had harmed him or concealed his body. After their appeal was denied, the lawyer escalated the case to the Supreme Court, highlighting the uncertainty surrounding Timothy's cause of death. He proposed that Timothy might have simply run away from the park and died from natural causes, insisting that no one had killed him. Additionally, he pointed out that several legal standards required for a murder charge and conviction had not been met. The Chief Justice recused himself from the case, and with the remaining justices unable to reach a consensus, the guilty verdict was upheld. The defense attorney, undeterred, after the 2016 conviction, Michelle's defense team appealed, escalating the case to the New Jersey Supreme Court, where Chief Justice Stuart Rabner recused himself. On December 28, 2021, the court vacated the conviction by a 4-3 decision, citing insufficient evidence to prove murder beyond a reasonable doubt. Michelle Lodzinski was released from Edna Mahan Correctional Facility that day, having served over 7 years. Double jeopardy prevented a retrial. She reunited with her family in Florida, where she had previously relocated. Despite the legal outcome, her brother and others, including George Wiltsey, continued to suspect her involvement, though no new evidence has emerged to reopen the case. After her release, Michelle's brother, who had testified against her during the trial, stated that the jury was correct in convicting her of murder. He argued that the lawyer did not rectify a significant wrong, but instead took away justice for little Tim. However, under state law, Michelle cannot be tried again for this case, even if new evidence arises in the future. The boy's biological father, George, still suspects that Michelle was involved in their son's death. He questions whether she committed the act herself or if she knows who did. Many of Michelle's family members also believe she is guilty, citing her strange behavior, inconsistent statements during interrogations, and the FBI's mishandling of the kidnapping. They are puzzled by why Michelle focused her time and energy on these issues instead of seeking the truth about her son's case. Although Timothy Wiltsey's murder remains officially unsolved, many believe that his mother evaded responsibility. On March 1, 2019, it was a chilly Friday evening in Harold Hill. Amy's Park, a popular local spot, was filled with the usual crowd of teenagers unwinding after a busy week. 17-year-old Jody Chesney, an energetic student, was at the center of it all. She sat with her boyfriend, Eddie Coyle, and a group of 5 friends on a picnic bench, enjoying their time together as laughter mixed with the sounds from a portable speaker. As the clock approached 9:25 p.m., the atmosphere in Amy's Park changed. Earlier, around 9 p.m., Jody's group had noticed 2 people hanging around, but they didn't think much of it since strangers often visit parks. The 2 left quietly and disappeared into the night. However, about 30 minutes later, they returned, but this time, they weren't just passing by. The 2 figures approached Jody's group deliberately, moving swiftly through the darkness. Without any warning or conversation, one of them suddenly attacked. Screams echoed through the air as Eddie caught her when she collapsed, leaving her friends in shock. Unfortunately, despite the paramedics' efforts, they couldn't save her. Metropolitan Police have sealed off the park and launched a murder investigation. Harold Hill was not known for such incidents. While London did face issues with knife crime, Amy's Park was considered a safe haven for children. Neighbors placed flowers and written tributes at the park's entrance. Purple ribbons, Jody's favorite color, were tied to fences. The police pledged to find answers, but time was of the essence. Each hour without a lead made the investigation more difficult. First, let's explore Jody's life. After her parents separated when Jody was 6, her father, Peter, became a devoted single parent to Jody and her older sister, Lucy. Their home was filled with love, despite the challenges they faced. Peter described Jody as an affectionate child who sought connection but was also quite shy. However, she gradually flourished, largely due to the support of a primary school teacher who helped her gain confidence. In 2012, when Jody was 10, Peter married Joanne, who willingly embraced her role as stepmother. Jody and Joanne developed a close bond that Jody treasured. Joanne noted that Jody longing for the maternal connection she missed, and together they worked to nurture that relationship. Jody's home was filled with laughter, thanks to her playful sense of humor. Joanne often referred to her as a wind-up toy because of her boundless energy that brightened their days. Jody's teenage years were largely shaped by her dedication to the Girl Scouts. She poured herself into the program, earning badges, hiking up mountains, and canoeing with her troop. In addition to her scouting achievements, she was a self-taught pianist who effortlessly played the piano. She was also just 3 weeks away from completing her Gold Duke of Edinburgh Award. At Havering's Sixth Form College, where she studied photography, psychology, and sociology, her principal praised her as an excellent, hard-working, and focused student. Jody aspired to work with animals or children and was determined to make a positive impact in the world. Her friends remembered her for her ability to make them laugh. Her sense of humor blossomed when she overcame her childhood shyness. Jody's relationship with her sister Lucy was incredibly strong. Even with 2 years between them, they shared everything: secrets, laughter, and aspirations. Lucy saw Jody as her other half, someone who always prioritized others' needs. Their home in Dagenham was a welcoming place for Jody's friends, who were drawn to her warmth. She had no enemies and had a special talent for making everyone feel included. Even her dog was part of her life. Jody enjoyed taking him for walks, which provided a sense of stability amid her busy schedule. On March 1, 2019, Jodi's day began like any other. It was a Friday, and she woke up in her Dagenham home with her dad Peter, stepmom Joanne, and sister Lucy. Jodi was excited not only for the weekend but also for her dad's upcoming birthday. She had been discussing gift ideas with Joanne, eager to find the perfect present to make Peter smile. At 8 a.m., she shared a heartfelt message on Instagram, "Happy birthday, Dad," accompanied by a heart emoji. This post would later deeply affect those who viewed it, gathering many comments following her death. Jodi spent her morning at Havering Sixth Form College, where she was in her second year of A-levels. After her classes ended around 3 p.m., she left college with her backpack over one shoulder, looking forward to the weekend ahead. Back in Dagenham, Jodi had one last thing to do before her evening plans. She took Dog, the family's Yorkshire Terrier, for a walk, a routine that she cherished. By 4:30 p.m., she was back home, catching up with Joanne and Peter, who were preparing to celebrate Peter's birthday. Jodi mentioned that she would be spending time with friends later, which was a typical Friday night for her. Jodi grabbed her jacket, said her goodbyes, and left around 5:30 p.m., promising to return later. She made her way to Romford railway station, a quick bus ride away, to meet her boyfriend, Eddie, and a group of friends. By 6:30 p.m., the group of 6 teens, including Eddie, had gathered and were animatedly discussing their plans for the evening. Their gathering was recorded by surveillance cameras. Romford was their usual hangout, a popular spot for East London teens, filled with shops and fast food restaurants. That night, however, they decided to go to Amy's Park in Harold Hill, about a mile from Havering College, another favorite spot for them. The park featured a playground in the center and benches where teens would gather after dark. By 7:30 p.m., they were settled on a picnic bench, playing music from a portable speaker, just the kind of relaxed night Jodi enjoyed. They had a great time together. At around 9 p.m., Jodi's group spotted 2 figures in the park. They didn't seem unusual since Amy's Park is a public area where people come and go. The 2 stayed for a short time but left without engaging with anyone, disappearing into the night. Jodi and her friends paid them no mind, enjoying their music and conversation. However, at 9:20 p.m., the same 2 figures returned, this time moving with a noticeable intent. According to police reports from the Metropolitan Police, they approached Jodi's group directly, cutting through the darkness. One figure was dressed in dark clothing, and his face was hidden. The other figure was less clear, appearing as a shadow beside him. Without warning, the first attacker stabbed Jodi in the back with such force that the knife broke, causing a severe 7-inch wound that collapsed her lung. Chaos erupted in the park. Eddie's scream shattered the night, and her friends stood frozen in shock. Eddie caught her as she fell, holding her on the ground and desperately calling for help. The 2 attackers quickly disappeared into the darkness. In a panic, Eddie called emergency services, urgency in his voice as he pleaded for an ambulance. Nearby residents were alerted by the screams. A woman began CPR, not realizing that the broken knife was still lodged in Jodi's back. A man in a van stopped to assist, applying his coat to the wound, while another friend to help stop the bleeding. Paramedics arrived within minutes, but Jodi's injuries were severe. Despite their efforts, she was declared dead at 10:26 p.m., just over an hour after the attack. Amy's Park was turned into a crime scene, marked off by police tape as forensic teams searched for evidence. Jodi's friends, still in shock, told the police there was no argument or warning, just a sudden, unprovoked attack. The Metropolitan Police's homicide and major crime team took control of the investigation, with Acting Detective Chief Superintendent promising to find those responsible. As the investigation progressed, detectives focused on Jodi's last hours, using witness accounts and phone records to confirm her movements. A key moment in the case came when a local man contacted the police. He reported seeing 2 men run out of the park on the night of Jodi's attack and get into a black Vauxhall Corsa before driving away quickly. The witness also mentioned that there was at least one other person in the car, the driver. CCTV footage played a crucial role in the investigation. The streets of Harold Hill, equipped with various cameras, provided a collection of unclear images. By March 2nd, police had reviewed footage from St. Neots Road and nearby Retford Road, showing two males leaving Amy's Park around 9:25 p.m. One wore a dark jacket with a noticeable pattern, while the other wore a hoodie that covered his face. On March 3rd, the police arrested 20-year-old Manuel Petrovich. The black Vauxhall seen at the crime scene was registered to him. Petrovich denied being involved in Jody's murder, claiming that his car had been stolen during a robbery at knife point. However, he later acknowledged that he owned the Vauxhall and had a mobile phone he used for selling cannabis. He refused to identify anyone he was with that night because he was concerned for his own safety and his family's safety, stating that people had already come to his house looking for him. During further questioning, he described the events of the night Jody died but referred to the attackers as Man A and Man B out of fear. Petrovich explained that on March 1st, he was with a friend who received a call from Man A asking for a ride. They picked up Man A and another person, Man B, and drove to Harold Hill for Man A to collect some cannabis and money. According to him, Man A and Man B got out of the car at Harold Hill, leaving Petrovich and his friend inside. He said the two men were away for about 5 minutes and seemed calm when they returned, noting that there was nothing unusual about their behavior. He stated, "Nothing about them made me suspicious. I did not see either of them carrying anything. My friend and I were told that Man A was collecting money in banned substance." After dropping off the two men, Petrovich claimed that a black male threatened him with a knife and took his car keys. He said that the next day, he heard about a girl who was stabbed in Harold Hill and hoped it wasn't related to his earlier encounter with Man A and Man B. Detectives identified a second suspect, a 19-year-old known to frequent the Harold Hill drug scene, based on witness descriptions of a black male in his late teens. To keep him from knowing he was a suspect, police kept his name confidential, referring to him as Suspect A in initial reports. The investigation continued to grow. A woman in her 40s who lives across the street from Amy's Park reported seeing suspicious individuals coming and going for weeks, especially at night. She also noted a young teenager who resembled Suspect B, suggesting he was running errands for older men. These accounts indicate a possible connection to banned substance activity, as there is a known issue with cannabis in Harold Hill, often involving teens as runners. Detectives believe Jody's group may have been mistaken for rival banned substance dealers. Although Jody has a clean record and no known ties to banned substance, this complicates the investigation. By March 10th, 9 days after Jody's death, the police were making significant progress. Acting on a tip, officers from the Metropolitan Police's Homicide and Major Crime Command focused on a house on Rogers Road in Dagenham, connected to Aaron Isaacs' uncle. They believed Svensson, referred to as Man A, and Isaacs, known as Man B, were hiding there after the attack. At 7 p.m., armed officers surrounded the location, with body cameras recording. In a dramatic turn of events, 19-year-old Svensson Ong-Akwai tried to escape by climbing over a rear flat roof but fell through a conservatory, shattering glass everywhere. A policeman approached and handcuffed him. Svensson's phone had texts linking him to Petrovich and discussing business in Amy's Park. When officers searched his home, they found a jacket that matched one seen in CCTV footage, with traces of Jody's blood on it. Meanwhile, 17-year-old Aaron Isaacs attempted to escape through a window but was caught in the back garden, where he had discarded a rucksack containing a large knife, 2 toothbrushes, and hair mousse, an unusual combination that raised suspicion. The police didn't stop there. They also arrested a 16-year-old boy, a friend of Manuel Petrovich, whose name was withheld for legal reasons, on suspicion of involvement in the crime. The police were casting a wide net, recognizing that Harold Hill's banned substance scene involved numerous runners and dealers. By May, all 4 individuals were facing charges. Svensson and Aaron were charged with murder, while Petrovich and the 16-year-old were charged with murder and manslaughter. Svensson was born on March 29, 2000, grew up in Harold Hill, near Amy's Park. He was raised by his mother and has 4 sisters. His childhood was troubled, primarily due to his father. In 2017, Svensson was kicked out of his home for disrespectful behavior and subsequently lived in a social services hostel in Romford. He described himself as a boxer hoping to become a professional. However, Svensson has criminal convictions for possessing and supplying cannabis and other banned substances. Transporting banned substance between London and rural areas, a risky environment where violence was common. In 2018, he violated a 6-week suspended sentence related to handling stolen jewelry. During the interrogation, Svensson remained calm. He acknowledged being in Amy's Park but insisted he was only there to pick up cannabis. He denied stabbing Jody and instead accused Aaron of being responsible for the attack. Aaron, born on January 27, 2002, faced many challenges from a young age. He lived in a flat with his mother and brother. His childhood as troubled. His mother dealt with mental health issues, and he had been in contact with children's services since he was 4 years old. Aaron's criminal record included offenses such as carrying a screwdriver, causing bodily harm, possessing cannabis, and stealing a vehicle. When he was detained, he was uncooperative, even throwing a rucksack that contained a knife during his arrest. During questioning, he claimed he was simply hanging out with Svensson and insisted he had no knowledge of the knife. He told the detectives that he didn't touch Jody's, blaming Svensson for the attack and saying he ran away out of fear. Manuel Petrovich, the suspected driver, is a 20-year-old local from Romford with connections to banned substance circles. Although not much is known about his background, he was considered a trusted associate of Svensson and frequently lent his car for various operations. In a leaked prison conversation that prosecutors received, Petrovich acknowledged that Svensson had been planning activities in Amy's Park and mentioned that they had set him up a couple of months prior. He stated that he remained in the car and did not learn about the attack's outcome until later. Petrovic denied the murder charges, asserting that he was unaware Jody was the target and had no intention to cause harm. He explained that Jody's group was mistakenly identified as the intended targets, as they were in the same area. They went to confront their rivals but ended up attacking the wrong people, he told a friend, not realizing he was being recorded. Anticipating arrest, Svensson took extreme measures to hide his actions. He burned his clothes after the attack, except for his jacket. Aaron also disposed of his clothes, and both men fled to Dagenham in an attempt to escape the police. During their interrogations, they played a blame game, each pointing fingers at the other. Svensson claimed he was only a lookout, while Aaron argued he wasn't involved in the plan. However, the evidence against them grew: the blood-stained jacket, phone records indicating they had conspired together, and CCTV footage showing them at the crime scene. As the formal charges were laid out, the community in Harold Hill struggled to understand the senseless motives behind the crime. Jody, a Girl Scout who had no ties to banned substance, became an unwitting victim in a conflict she was unaware of. While the arrests brought some relief, they did not provide closure. Jody's family, especially her father Peter, wanted justice. Peter established the Jody Chesney Foundation, a charity aimed at diverting young people from knife crime. The foundation's website described Jody as a kind person who accepted everyone. Purple ribbons emerged as symbols of her memory, with vigils and scouting events celebrating her compassion. Jody's legacy reached beyond Harold Hill, igniting national discussions about knife crime. The foundation supported youth programs, and Peter advocated for stricter laws, although he told that no law will bring her back. The trial began on September 17, 2019, at the Old Bailey, one of London's most historic courts. 4 defendants stood accused: Svensson Onakwy, 19, Aaron Isaacs, 17, Manuel Petrovich, 20, and a 16-year-old boy, unnamed for legal reasons. The courtroom was heavy with emotion. Jody's family, including her dad, Peter, stepmom, Joanne, and sister, Lucy, attended nearly every day, wearing purple ribbons in her memory. The prosecutor asserting that all 4 defendants played a role in a brutal act of unprovoked violence linked to a turf war. He explained to the jurors that Jody was completely innocent and had been mistakenly identified as a rival by the assailants who normally visited Amy's Park. He emphasized damaging evidence, including CCTV footage showing Petrovich's black Vauxhall Corsa near the park, a blood-stained jacket belonging to Svensson, and phone records that connected the group to a premeditated attack. He also referenced a conversation in prison where Petrovich admitted that Svensson intended to target rivals but ended up attacking the wrong people. The prosecutor claimed that Svensson was the person who stabbed Jody, with Aaron enthusiastically supporting him, while Petrovich and the 16-year-old boy assisted in the attack. This was not a spontaneous act, the prosecutor told, highlighting that the group intended to inflict serious harm, making them all responsible for murder under joint enterprise law. The defense teams actively sought to clear their clients of wrongdoing. Charles Sherrard, who represented Svensson, acknowledged that his client was present in the park but denied that he was the one who stabbed Jody. Sherrard pointed to Aaron as the real attacker and argued that Svensson's clothing, a white hoodie and gray tracksuit, did not match the description of a figure dressed in black provided by witnesses. Sarah Forshaw, who defended Petrovich, claimed her client was only a driver and unaware of any violent plans. If Petrovich had known what was going to happen, he would have turned off his phone like Svensson did, she asserted to the jurors. Natasha Wong, representing Aaron, contended that he was merely a runner without any intent to commit violence, denying that he carried a knife or was aware of Svensson's plans. Louise Sweet, who defended the 16-year-old, emphasized his lack of a violent history and urged jurors to view him as a bystander rather than an active participant. Each defense relied on the absence of direct evidence, such as DNA on the knife, in hopes of creating reasonable doubt. After 45 hours of testimony, which included Eddie Coyle's description of the attack and forensic evidence of an 18 centimeters deep wound, the jury deliberated for just over 5 hours. On November 7, 2019, they reached their decision. Svensson Ong-Akwai and Aaron Isaacs were found guilty of murder, while Manuel Petrovich and the 16-year-old were acquitted of all charges. Sentencing took place on November 18, where Judge Wendy Joseph condemned the pathetic location dispute that resulted in Jody's death. Svensson Ong-Akwai, identified as the one who stabbed Jody, received a life sentence with a minimum of 26 years, while Aaron Isaacs, his accomplice, received life with a minimum of 18 years. The courtroom was emotional as impact statements were read. While the verdict offered bittersweet relief to Jody's family, Peter, speaking outside the court, stated he was over the moon about the convictions but heartbroken over his loss. Jody's sister Lucy wrote in her statement, she was only 20 years old, and already she dreaded her life. Joanne believed that Petrovich, as the driver, should have faced consequences, but the family chose to focus on preserving Jody's memory. The Jody Chesney Foundation is actively working to make a difference. They hosted a fundraiser in 2024 that raised £10,000 for workshops aimed at preventing knife crime, as reported on their website. Jody Chesney's life, vibrant and full of promise, was tragically cut short on March 1, 2019, in a senseless act of violence that shook Harold Hill. The convictions of Svensson Ong-Akwai and Aaron Isaacs brought a measure of justice, but no verdict could heal the void left in the hearts of her family and community. Through the Jody Chesney Foundation, her father Peter channels grief into action, raising funds to combat knife crime. Purple ribbons, Jody's favorite color, continue to symbolize her compassion and the collective resolve to honor her memory. Her legacy endures, inspiring a national call to end the scourge of knife crime and ensure no other family endures such loss. Though Jody is gone, her light shines on in every step taken to make communities safer. Marilena Rosari was a 58-year-old woman living with her husband in Castellanza, Italy. They had 2 grown daughters who lived on their own and had children of their own, making Marilena a grandmother. She worked as a promoter in supermarkets located in the province of Varese. By 2017, she viewed herself as a successful individual, enjoying a peaceful life while taking care of her family. On Sunday, July 30, 2017, Marilena and her husband visited a mutual friend's house for dinner in a nearby town. They spent a few hours there before returning home together to Castellanza. It was a typical quiet evening for them. However, once they arrived home, her husband had other plans. He planned to visit his elderly mother in the nearby town, as she was unwell and needed help with housework. He was absent all evening and night, returning home the next morning around 10:30 a.m. He expected to find his wife at home since she usually left for work later. Typically, at that time, she would be enjoying her morning routine, having breakfast, getting ready, and occasionally doing some cleaning. To his surprise, Marilena was missing. Initially, her husband thought she might have gone to work earlier than usual, possibly due to a last-minute request. However, Marilena always communicated any changes to her schedule and would not just disappear without notice. Moreover, that morning, she had planned to spend time with him to discuss their future plans and some important matters. He started to feel anxious and tried to reach Marilena. After several unsuccessful attempts to call her mobile phone, he noticed it was turned off, which was unusual for her as she was always reachable during work hours. When he checked the house, he discovered more worrying signs. Her bag containing personal items and documents was missing, but her car was parked in the yard. This was strange since she never left without her car. Concerned, he went outside to look around the neighborhood. He talked to several neighbors who were awake and working in their gardens, but none of them had seen or heard anything unusual. He also called his daughters, but they had not heard from their mother either. Marilena's phone still remained off. Feeling restless, he decided to contact the police. However, they informed him that they could not file a missing person report until 24 hours had passed. It was not until July 31st, when he returned to the police station, that his report was finally accepted and the search began. During this time, he couldn't get in touch with Marilena. He reached out to everyone who knew her, including her daughters, relatives, and colleagues, but no one had seen her. By the time the police acknowledged the report of her disappearance, the management and staff at the supermarkets were already worried because she hadn't shown up for work in 2 days. Marilena was known for her punctuality and reliability. She never missed a shift, so her absence raised great concern. The police interviewed all of Marilena's co-workers. They were shocked by her disappearance and found no indications that anything was wrong. No one was aware of any issues she might have been dealing with, nor did it seem like she had plans for a long trip or any reason to leave unexpectedly. The last person to see and talk to Marilena was her husband, making him the first person law enforcement wanted to question. Detectives interviewed him multiple times to understand what happened before her disappearance. They aimed to find out if the couple had any issues that might have led Marilena to leave or if anyone harbored ill will toward her. Her husband found these suggestions ridiculous and dismissed them, stating that their family had never been involved in crime or shady activities, and they did not have any enemies. Detectives interviewed Marilena's friends and found that they had no useful information. Her husband mentioned one concerning detail: the family was facing financial troubles, owing €10,000 to the bank. However, this lead seemed unhelpful since they were consistently making payments on the loan. He also provided documentation proving that both he and Marilena were fulfilling their financial obligations without issues. The police explored various possibilities, ranging from a voluntary disappearance to a potential crime, but after several days, they had no concrete answers. Meanwhile, Marilena had not used her phone or bank cards, raising concerns about her well-being, as it's difficult for anyone to survive long without money, a phone, or a car. A press conference was held to gather more information about Marilena's disappearance, and a television appeal was broadcasted to raise awareness. The prosecutor's office requested a detailed description of the missing woman, which was shared on all channels along with a call for eyewitnesses to come forward. Unfortunately, this effort did not lead to any new information. To assist with the search, specially trained dogs were brought in. The dogs were taken around the house and the area by the gate, but they remained calm and did not indicate any scent. The courtyard and Marilena's car were also searched without any success. Additionally, Marilena's relatives appeared on television, made several public statements, and directly reached out to her in hopes of getting a response. Days went by, but Marilena was still missing. The critical timeframe for finding her alive had passed, and anxiety deepened as troubling thoughts arose. Her husband and daughters felt increasingly worried. Law enforcement still issued a nationwide appeal through various media to widen the search efforts. Meanwhile, relatives created and distributed flyers featuring Marilena's photo throughout the city. A week later, the police had almost lost hope of finding her alive and shifted their focus to the surrounding area, trying to identify anyone who might have been involved in her possible murder or kidnapping. Naturally, close relatives, especially her husband, became suspects. He was the last known person to have spent time with her. He claimed he was at his mother's house during the time she went missing, which raised suspicions. After appearing on television, he acted cautiously, seemingly avoiding drawing attention to himself. He explained this behavior by saying he wanted to evade media scrutiny, but law enforcement grew suspicious that there might be a more concerning reason behind his actions. Consequently, they began to investigate him more thoroughly. Detectives confirmed that the evening after her husband brought her home, he went to help his sick mother with housework. Neighbors saw them arrive together, and several witnesses confirmed that he left almost immediately afterward. He was not seen again until the next morning. Neighbors near his mother's house also supported his story, stating he arrived late in the evening, and the timing matched perfectly. CCTV cameras along the road recorded his car traveling to and from his mother's house at the times he mentioned. His alibi appeared solid and did not raise any suspicions. However, investigators were not quick to remove him from the list of suspects, as close acquaintances are often implicated in such cases. Therefore, they returned to that neighborhood hoping to gather more information from former neighbors. Local residents were interviewed, and detectives meticulously investigated Marilena's previous social circle to find any suspicious individuals who might have had an interest in the kidnapping or potential violent actions. At this stage, her husband appeared to be an unlikely suspect for several reasons. He and his wife were widely regarded as loving partners with minimal disagreements. He had no financial incentive to cause her harm, and he had a solid alibi. Meanwhile, the investigation continued to progress as new leads surfaced. After speaking with the couple's acquaintances at their former residence, the Carabinieri shifted their focus to Vito Clerico, a 64-year-old man who was well acquainted with Marilena and her husband, lived nearby. From the outset, Vito displayed a cautious demeanor and seemed anxious. During questioning, he changed his story multiple times, which raised significant suspicions. The investigation team focused on Marilena's neighbor to gather more information. Background checks revealed that he had no criminal record, and his relationship with Marilena did not initially cause any concerns. A mutual friend mentioned that they met at work when Marilena was a promoter at shopping centers. This was Vito working as a storekeeper at Marilena's workplace. Their jobs frequently brought them together, leading to regular communication. The friend described Vito as irresponsible, noting that he had a history of borrowing large amounts of money from others and either not repaying it or repaying it late. There were also rumors that Marilena had lent him money during their time together, which could suggest a possible motive for the crime. As a result, he was called in for questioning. During the interview at the station, Vito described receiving a call from Marilena on the night she disappeared. She asked to meet him at the station in Garbiniere Milanese, explaining that her husband was visiting his sick mother and could not assist her. She mentioned having important business in the city. Vito, being friends with her, agreed to meet, but Marilena never showed up. Initially, he thought she changed her mind and went home. However, several aspects of his story seemed suspicious. First, the timing was too late for any business dealings. Second, the timeline Vito provided did not align with the information the police had confirmed. According to the timeline, Marilena should have been preparing to go to the station while she was with her friends, but no one confirmed that she had any plans to go anywhere or contacted anyone. Additionally, since her husband was nearby, she could have asked him for help. All of this seemed illogical. Due to these inconsistencies, detectives decided to investigate Vito's account further. They discovered that his mobile phone was never registered on the route he claimed to have taken. Furthermore, he was not seen on any surveillance cameras, including those at the station. If Vito was telling the truth, he should have appeared on video. The most intriguing discovery was that the detectives found a woman in the recordings who looked like Marilena. This indicated that she had indeed visited Garbiniere Milanese, from which she never returned. Upon examining Vito's mobile phone, the detectives confirmed that he had received several calls in the days leading up to her disappearance. Marilena had repeatedly tried to contact him, but he had consistently ignored her. However, on the night she disappeared, there was no call from her to him. Instead, there was a single outgoing call from Vito to her number on the evening of July 30, 2017. This evidence directly contradicted his account of events. During the conversation, one of the detectives spotted dark red stains on Vito's trousers that looked like blood. Vito quickly claimed that he raised rabbits and that the stains might have come from butchering one of them, as he owned around 40 rabbits. However, the police doubted his story, confiscated the trousers, and sent them to a lab for testing. The analysis confirmed that the stains were human blood, specifically matching that of Marilena. Vito was unable to explain this finding. On September 11, 2017, he was arrested, 40 days after Marilena had disappeared. He was charged with murder and concealing her body. During interrogations, Vito provided confusing and inconsistent accounts that varied from day to day, filled with odd details, but he did not provide any clear confessions or truth. Eventually, he was worn down and agreed to tell investigators where Marilena's body, while still denying that he was the murderer. He claimed he helped the real killer hide her body out of fear for himself and his wife. Vito was compelled to assist in disposing of a body, and he kept the identity of Marilena's killer a secret. On September 12, authorities began excavating his backyard, specifically in a small garden in Garbagnac Milanese. At the exact spot Vito indicated, they found a shallow grave approximately 40 centimeters deep. Inside, they discovered a decapitated body wrapped in multiple layers of polyethylene and placed in a bag, which was partially covered in concrete. The advanced decomposition of the remains and the missing head complicated the identification process. Although the clothing resembled Marilena's, there were no identifying features, like tattoos, scars, or fractures, to confirm her identity. As a result, identification needed to be made using dental records. In the meantime, police continued to search for the missing head. Vito, for unknown reasons, refused to cooperate with law enforcement. His behavior was quite unusual, leading them to suspect he might be feigning mental disorders to claim insanity during the trial and evade punishment for the murder. It was revealed that he had been diagnosed with minor mental health issues in the past and had taken medication, but he had recently stopped. Eventually, under pressure from detectives, Vito started talking again. He claimed that he not only helped hide Marilena's body but also beheaded her after the murder. He said a certain killer had ordered him to do this. The decapitation was a deliberate act to make identification more difficult. Vito stated that he had thrown the head in a dumpster. Given how much time had passed, it was likely that the head had already been taken to a dump outside the city, making it nearly impossible to find. However, the authorities were skeptical. Every claim he made needed to be verified. While interrogating Vito, the police also spoke with his family members. One of them mentioned that Vito owned several plots of land. He recalled seeing Vito heading toward one of the most remote plots the day after Marilena's disappearance. This plot was an abandoned field located between Garbagnac Milanese and the town where Marilena lived. The suspect owned property there but typically did not visit without a valid reason. The family members speculated that Vito might have gone to this isolated area to dispose of Marilena's head. Before beginning their search for the head, the police rechecked Vito's mobile phone. This allowed them to confirm that he had indeed traveled to that location, helping to narrow down the search area. A large search team was organized, which included specially trained dogs. The task was made more difficult by the thick growth of blackberries in most of the area. The team thoroughly searched the abandoned field. A few hundred meters from the road, they found a bag hidden in the bushes. It was the same bag that Marilena usually took with her for errands and shopping. Inside the bag was Marilena's head. On September 26th, the body was finally confirmed to be that of Marilena Ree, a 58-year-old woman who had been missing. However, one question still lingered: what was the motive behind her murder? It is believed that it was likely connected to financial issues. Investigators discovered that in 2014, Marilena had loaned Vito and his wife a significant amount of money, approximately 80,000 euros, from her savings. Vito had persuaded a mutual acquaintance that he and his wife were struggling with the bank due to overdue loans and were at risk of losing their home. Trusting his word, Marilena lent him the money, believing he was honest. In the following years, Vito repeatedly delayed paying back the debt, relying on Marilena's patience and her lack of urgent financial needs. However, Marilena eventually needed the money and requested a quick repayment. When Vito failed to return the funds, she had to take out a bank loan, planning to pay it off as soon as she received her repayment from Vito. Despite her growing insistence on getting her money back, Vito still did not repay the debt. On that significant evening, after her husband went to visit his mother, Marilena likely chose to confront Vito about the money. It is unclear how she ended up in the nearby city. During their discussion, Vito refused to return the money, which prompted a violent reaction from Marilena. This led to a conflict that escalated into a fight. A forensic expert noted that before Marilena was beheaded, she was hit on the head with a blunt object at least 6 times. The specifics are hard to determine due to multiple fractures in her skull and facial bones. Additionally, the remains had deteriorated significantly, complicating the examination further. After the murder, Vito cut off his victim's head, buried the body in a shallow grave near his house, wrapped it in several layers of plastic, and partially covered it with concrete. He had only a small amount of building materials, which was insufficient to fully hide the burial site. He placed the head inside her bag, took it out of town, and threw it deep into the thorny bushes on his remote property, hoping it would never be discovered. Even though the reconstruction of the events was supported by various pieces of evidence, Vito did not confess to the crime. Searches of his house and car found traces of blood and indirect evidence suggesting that he was not alone in committing the crime. Unfortunately, not all details could be uncovered. Vito completely denied any involvement of his wife or anyone else, claiming that a third party was responsible but refusing to identify them. After several interrogations, he ultimately took the blame for the crime. Vito's defense attorney claimed that his confession was coerced, noting that he had been questioned at least 10 times and believed his rights were violated. Initially, he only admitted to hiding the remains but did not confess to murder. However, he later claimed to have killed Marilena. Eventually, his story changed again, and he denied everything. The lawyer suggested that someone else must have committed the crime, indicating the possible involvement of a third party. However, this theory could not be supported by witnesses or the evidence gathered. Without any solid leads on the identity of this mysterious person, the idea was dismissed. All of Vito's inconsistent statements, which raised suspicions among investigators, were attributed to an effort to protect his wife. The next step focused on Vito's mental state. Psychiatric evaluations were performed, which found no significant issues. The prosecution claimed that the concealed body, beheading, and the discarded bag far from the city pointed to premeditated murder, a well-planned crime. It was clear that the defendant had intentionally lured the victim into a trap. However, despite the strong arguments and evidence, Vito cleverly kept altering his story, apparently aiming to confuse the investigation. In a desperate attempt to defend himself, Vito tried to argue that the prosecution was biased against him. His lawyer suggested this was to make him a scapegoat and resolve the case quickly. The accused also mentioned having amnesia, which he said prevented him from remembering the days surrounding Marilena's murder. He ultimately confessed to hearing voices of demons that had tormented him for years, leading him to kill Marilena. However, these claims were disproven through investigations, and multiple witnesses stated they had never seen him exhibit signs of mental illness. Throughout the investigation, Vito remained calm and did not show signs of significant stress, which is uncommon for someone with mental health issues. The only medical condition identified in him was epilepsy, but he experienced seizures very rarely. Even if they happened more frequently, aggressive behavior is not typical for those with epilepsy. Detectives were intrigued by Vito's desperate attempts to shift the focus away from his wife. From the start, she appeared to be a potential accomplice in the murder. Investigators viewed her as more dominant and assertive than Vito, leading them to suspect she might have been the mastermind behind the crime. As they dug deeper, they uncovered more compelling information. Marilena was not the only woman deceived by Vito. He frequently borrowed large amounts of money from relatives, friends, and colleagues, ranging from 30,000 to 100,000 euros, to finance the construction of his house. This project became an obsession for both Vito and his wife, who had long dreamed of building a grand villa. To achieve their goal, they took on significant debts and loans, often borrowing again just to make payments and delay the associated issues of non-payment. By the time Marilena was murdered, they were under immense pressure from creditors. It is likely that everyone who lent them money was in danger, just as Marilena was. Due to the extensive examinations needed for a thorough investigation of the deceased's body, the burial did not take place until 10 months after the body was found. The funeral was held on June 1, 2018. By the end of January 2019, the trial of Vito began. From the start, his inconsistent statements, confessions, and retractions created a sense of distrust. The defense attorney struggled to effectively counter the prosecution's arguments, achieving only limited success in reducing the charges. Initially, it was thought that the murder involved torture, but a forensic expert later confirmed that the severed head and some of the body mutilations occurred after death. On January 24, 2019, Vito, who is 66 years old, was sentenced to life imprisonment. He appealed the verdict, but his appeal was rejected. Investigations into his wife's possible involvement in Marilena's death are still ongoing. On November 21, 2017, Vito was attacked in prison by his cellmate. His cellmate used a metal plate and a makeshift weapon during the assault. Vito reported that he had tried to stop all communication with his cellmate, who had made clear abuse advances that escalated into harassment. When Vito threatened to report his cellmate's behavior, he was attacked. While in prison, Vito continually expressed his dissatisfaction with the justice system, insisting on his innocence and asking for safety from his hostile cellmate. Despite his requests, he was sent back to prison after receiving treatment. On Sunday, November 29, 2020, he was found dead in the prison toilet. In his hand was a note that powerfully criticized the Italian law enforcement. He died after swallowing a garbage bag, which obstructed his airway and led to suffocation. Many suspect that he did not take his own life and that the incident was planned by his cellmate. In October 1975, the murder of 15-year-old Martha Elizabeth Moxley shocked the town of Greenwich, Connecticut. Her body was found brutally beaten with a golf club, which was traced back to the home of a well-known family with political ties. This tragic event caused years of anguish for the Moxley family as they sought justice for their daughter's death. Let's go back in time. The Moxley family moved to Greenwich, Connecticut, hoping to find a safe environment for their children, John and Martha. Their parents allowed them to explore the town freely, trusting in their safety. Martha was a remarkable teenager known for her beauty and intelligence. She had a vibrant personality and a close bond with her brother. Throughout her childhood, Martha showed impressive intellect. Her love for reading and writing reflected her passion for knowledge. Martha was well liked by her peers because of her outstanding qualities. Her lively and friendly nature helped her make many friends. She often found herself at the center of social gatherings. After the Moxley family moved to their new home in Greenwich, Martha continued to excel in school. Her commitment to her studies showed through her excellent grades and achievements. She had a natural gift for critical thinking and problem-solving, distinguishing her from her classmates. Martha's aspirations went beyond academics. She wanted to impact the world through her writing. Her love for storytelling and her talent for expressing ideas clearly made her a strong candidate for a journalism career. October 30th was recognized as Mischief Night in Greenwich. During this tradition, children and teens engaged in playful mischief, often causing minor disturbances in their neighborhoods. The night typically involved activities like vandalism, property damage, and pranks. Eager to join in the fun, Martha Moxley spent the evening playing toilet papering over houses with her friends. It was a joyful night filled with laughter and innocent entertainment among the teenagers. Among the partygoers was 17-year-old Thomas Skakel, the nephew of Ethel Kennedy, who is the widow of former U.S. Senator Robert F. Kennedy. The Kennedy family was one of the most powerful and well-known political families in the United States from the 1960s to the early 1990s. Their name became closely associated with American politics, impacting all areas of society. President John F. Kennedy was viewed as a symbol of youthful energy and change, captivating the nation with his charisma. His administration made important advances in space exploration, civil rights, and foreign policy. After John's assassination, Robert F. Kennedy took on the role of leader for the family's political ambitions, known for his commitment to social justice and strong support for the civil rights movement. Robert's assassination added to the sorrow of the already mourning Kennedy family. However, their involvement in various scandals and controversies has damaged their reputation and overshadowed their political legacy. Sources indicate that Martha Moxley and Thomas Skakel were flirting and even kissing on the night she disappeared. The last sighting of Martha was around 9:30 p.m. when she was with Thomas near the pool in his backyard. After that, no one knew where she was until a shocking discovery was made the next morning, which stunned the entire community. On October 31st, the day after Mischief Night, Martha Moxley's body was discovered under a tree in her yard. Her clothing and underwear were pulled down to her ankles, but the medical examiner found no signs of abuse assault. Nearby, pieces of a 6-iron golf club were located, which became a key piece of evidence in understanding the circumstances surrounding Martha's death. The chief medical examiner of Connecticut performed an autopsy on Martha. His findings revealed disturbing details. Martha had multiple scalp lacerations, skull fractures, and injuries to her brain. The absence of signs of a struggle led the medical examiner to determine that Martha had been violently assaulted. The medical examiner determined that the weapon that caused her injuries and death was a 6-iron golf club, which matched evidence collected at the scene. The severity of her injuries and the strong evidence linking the golf club to the murder confirmed that her death was neither an accident nor an end to her own life. They classified Martha's death as a homicide. Witnesses reported seeing Martha with Thomas Skakel on the night she died, raising suspicions and directing detectives focused towards the Skakel family. An investigation later found that the golf club used to kill Martha originated from the Skakel home, which further increased doubts about the involvement of the two Skakel brothers. Although the investigation made initial progress, it soon stalled due to interference from the Skakel family. They interfered with the investigation right from the beginning. One significant way they obstructed progress was by blocking the police from accessing their son's school medical records. These records could have shed light on Thomas Skakel's behavior and any health issues he might have had at the time of the crime. By denying investigators this information, the Skakel family hindered the exploration of potential motives. Thomas's father took further actions to impede the investigation. He discouraged witnesses from stepping forward or sharing what they knew about the crime, making it challenging for investigators to gather first-hand testimonies. This interference also significantly hampered the progress of the investigation. When news of Martha's murder emerged, Thomas and Michael Skakel, grandsons of Robert F. Kennedy, became targets of intense media scrutiny. Reporters and the public were eager to uncover any potential involvement or connections to Martha's death. As members of the Kennedy family, the brothers faced overwhelming speculation. Throughout the investigation, Thomas and Michael maintained their innocence, asserting that they had no involvement in Martha's murder. They consistently denied being at the party where she was killed and claimed ignorance about the circumstances of her death. Their repeated denials attracted even more media attention and public interest in the case. However, despite the extensive coverage, there was no solid evidence linking the brothers to Martha's murder. The murder of Martha Moxley attracted worldwide attention because of the involvement of the Kennedy family. Initially, attention turned to Kenneth Littleton, who was hired as a tutor by the Skakel family just hours before Martha's murder. Littleton was a live-in tutor for the Skakel brothers, and since he was present near the crime scene, he was suspected of being an accomplice. His interactions with the brothers were examined, and some believed he might have influenced them to commit the crime. As time passed, the testimonies from Thomas and Michael Skakel about that night began to change. Witnesses reported that Michael had confessed to killing Martha with a golf club. Additionally, a former classmate of Michael claimed he received preferential treatment and boasted about escaping punishment for the murder because of his ties to the Kennedy family. Many books have been written about the Moxley murder in an effort to uncover the truth about her death. One notable book is A Season in Purgatory by acclaimed author Dominic Dunn, which focuses on the Moxley murder case. Dunn conducted thorough research to provide a detailed account of the events leading up to Martha's death. Another significant book, Murder in Greenwich by Mark Furman, a former police detective known, presents his perspective on the investigation and various theories surrounding the case. These books examine different theories proposed by investigators and advocates for justice for Martha. Despite significant media and public interest, the case remained unsolved, which caused frustration for both investigators and the public. The tragic death of Martha Moxley shocked the community and led to a lengthy investigation that lasted nearly 2 decades. In 1998, a jury was assembled to examine the circumstances of her murder. After a thorough inquiry lasting almost 2 years, there was enough evidence to charge Michael Skakel with the crime. In January 2000, police issued an arrest warrant for Michael, who then turned himself in. He was soon released on bail after posting a $500,000 bond. On March 14, 2000, Michael was arraigned in juvenile court. Although he was 15 years old when Martha was murdered, the judge decided to try him as an adult. Michael Skakel's trial began on May 7, 2002, in Norwalk, Connecticut. Prosecutors built a strong case by presenting evidence linking him to the crime and highlighting inconsistencies in his alibi. The defense maintained that Michael was innocent, arguing he was at a cousin's house when the murder occurred. The murder trial of Martha Moxley received extensive media coverage, drawing attention from both national outlets and the local community. Many people were invested in the case, hoping for justice for the victim. During the trial, the prosecution introduced a book proposal that suggested his involvement in the crime. In this proposal, Michael admitted to engaging in inappropriate behavior while in a tree on the night of the murder. Although he acknowledged being at the crime scene, he did not confess to directly harming Martha. Ultimately, on June 7, 2002, Michael Skakel was convicted of Moxley's murder and sentenced to 20 years to life in prison. He was assigned to Garner Correctional Facility in Newtown, Connecticut. Reactions to the verdict were mixed, with some individuals feeling satisfied and others raising concerns. Michael Skakel appealed his conviction, presenting several arguments. One of his main points was that the trial should have occurred in juvenile court instead of superior court, as he was only 15 years old at the time of the crime. He contended that his age should have prevented him from being charged as an adult. Furthermore, Skakel claimed that the prosecution committed misconduct by not disclosing crucial evidence that could have exonerated him, which he argued violated his due process rights and compromised the fairness of his trial. Nevertheless, in January 2006, the Connecticut Supreme Court dismissed his claims and upheld his conviction. In 2007, Michael Skakel hired a new attorney and requested a retrial in Connecticut court, proposing a new theory regarding Martha Moxley's murder. His defense team presented evidence implying that Gitano Tony Bryant, cousin of Los Angeles Lakers player Kobe Bryant and former classmate of Michael at Brunswick Private School in Greenwich. In an August 2003 videotaped interview with Vito Colucci, a private investigator hired by Michael, Bryant said that on the night of Moxley's murder, one of his friends had tried to molest her. Bryant said he had not come forward because his mother had warned him that, as a black man, he would be framed for the unsolved murder. A 2-week hearing in April 2007 allowed this oral evidence to be presented, along with other matters. In September 2007, Michael's attorneys filed a motion, based in part on Bryant's complaints, for a new trial. Official prosecutors responded that Bryant may have made up the story to sell a drama about the case. During this period, Michael's defense team appointed several full-time investigators to examine case details, hoping to uncover new evidence that would prove his innocence. Unfortunately, their efforts were hindered when a Supreme Court judge rejected Michael's request for a new trial, stating that Bryant's testimony lacked credibility and that there was no evidence of misconduct by the prosecutors during Michael's initial trial. Michael's attorneys once again appealed this ruling to the Connecticut Supreme Court. In 2009, a panel of 5 judges listened to the appeal, but a year later, on April 12, 2010, they ruled 4-1 against Michael. Despite these challenges, Michael and his legal team remained determined to secure his freedom. In January 2012, they requested a sentence reduction, arguing that he had been an exemplary prisoner and warranted leniency. However, this request was denied, and Michael's sentence continued to stand. In 2013, Michael Skakel appealed his conviction, claiming that his trial attorney, Michael Sherman, had not provided effective representation. During the hearing, Michael Skakel accused Sherman of lacking interest in his defense and being more focused on collecting fees to resolve his financial issues. This raised serious doubts about the fairness of his trial and the potential for a wrongful conviction. As a result, Michael was granted a new trial after it was determined that Sherman had not adequately defended him during his 2002 trial. On November 21, 2013, Michael Skakel was released on $1.2 million bail with other conditions. He must be monitored with a GPS device, have no contact with the Moxley family, must be checked in periodically by phone, and will not be allowed to leave the state of Connecticut unless permission is granted, although he later moved to Westchester County, New York. In December 2016, the Connecticut Supreme Court reinstated Michael's murder conviction in a 4-3 majority decision, writing that his conviction was the result of overwhelming evidence presented by prosecutors and that his legal representation was adequate. In January 2018, prosecutors asked the Connecticut Supreme Court to revoke Michael's bail and return him to prison to continue serving his sentence. However, on May 4, the Connecticut Supreme Court vacated Skakel's conviction and ordered a new trial. The court ruled that Sherman had provided ineffective assistance when he failed to contact an alibi witness named by Michael and that Michael had therefore been deprived of a fair trial. State prosecutors in Stamford have the right to seek a new trial for Michael. This ruling surprised many in the legal community and rekindled questions about the true circumstances of the crime. Despite the possibility of a new trial, in October 2020, the chief state attorney informed the Supreme Court that they would not retry Michael Skakel for Martha's murder. This decision came after a thorough review of the evidence. This decision marked the end of a lengthy legal battle that spanned decades and left many unanswered questions about the murder of Martha Moxley. In 2023, Michael Skakel filed lawsuits against the police investigator in Greenwich. The lawsuits alleged malicious prosecution and violations of constitutional rights. According to Michael's attorney, the fact that Michael spent over 11 years in prison for a crime he did not commit meant he could never be compensated for that lost time. Michael's lawsuits claimed that the lead investigator did not perform their duties properly, acted unethically, and intimidated witnesses during interviews, alleged that the investigator threatened witnesses to make them give false statements. These accusations raised significant concerns about the integrity of the investigation and the validity of Michael Skakel's conviction. Furthermore, the lawsuits argued that the investigator sought to profit from Michael's case, indicating that they were working on a book and film about Michael's supposed involvement in Martha's murder while continuing the investigation. Martha's brother, John, was shocked by the news of Michael's freedom and struggles to grasp the reasoning behind the court's decision. He is convinced that Michael Skakel is guilty and insists that just because Michael is free, it doesn't mean he is innocent. Instead, it reflects the judge's decisions and legal technicalities. In John's view, Michael Skakel killed his sister, a belief he holds firmly. Even though Michael is no longer in prison, John believes he will always be mentally imprisoned, tormented by his actions for the rest of his life. The Oxygen created a powerful documentary exploring the details of Martha Moxley's murder. The Moxley family chose to be part of the documentary to honor Martha and promote the truth about her case. Over the years, many theories have emerged regarding Martha Moxley's death. One of the key suspects is Michael Skakel. Several motives have been suggested for his alleged involvement, including jealousy and anger. Martha had a close friendship with Michael's brother, Thomas Skakel, which might have fueled Michael's resentment towards her. It has also been speculated that Michael may have seen a meeting between Martha and Thomas that triggered feelings of insecurity. Another suspect is Thomas Skakel himself. One theory proposes that he may have killed Martha out of jealousy or rage, especially since she reportedly rejected his advances. Additionally, their family tutor, Kenneth Littleton, has been considered a possible suspect. Others believe that her murderer was simply someone who happened to be passing by. Proponents of these theories argue that Michael Skakel was an easy target and that the true murderer has not yet been caught.
Agostina Jalabert was born on March 23, 1991, in Carmen de Patagones, Buenos Aires, Argentina. She belonged to a well-known family and was the eldest of three daughters of Colina and Edgardo Jalabert, who served as the Secretary of Health in their city. Her uncle, German Jalabert, a former provincial minister of tourism, and was a pre-candidate for deputy in the Rio Negro region. Consequently, the Jalabert family was widely recognized in their province and other regions of Argentina. Those who knew Agostina since her childhood consistently praised her outstanding qualities. She was described as a sensitive, sincere, and loving child who had a passion for dogs. She excelled in design, crafts, and decoration. She had a keen sense of taste and excelled in many things. Agustina also had a strong interest in fashion. She even designed the graduation sweaters for her high school class. She loved dressing up, and during her teenage years, her friends often gathered in the garage of her house for pre-dance parties. She would try to introduce her different groups of friends to each other, always striving to connect people. Those close to her described her as sociable and an excellent hostess. Agustina enjoyed baking and cooking, and she was skilled at it. With a curious nature, when something piqued her interest, she pursued it. After completing her secondary education, she initially enrolled in architecture but later abandoned it. During that time, she focused her energy on fashion design and studied it for a while, but she ultimately changed her direction. Nevertheless, she was a successful young woman who used her knowledge to chase her dreams. She even started her own clothing brand, worked as a model, and was building her career. At some point in her adult life, Agustina's path crossed with Juan Reverter, with whom she began a relationship that seemed to be going well. Little is known about Juan's life, and even the names of his parents have not been disclosed. The only accessible information about Juan is his LinkedIn profile, which promotes him as a software engineer and a graduate of the National Technological University in Argentina. Interestingly, a search at the university did not reveal him as a graduate. Instead, a resolution from the university's Superior Council in 2017 stated that he had not passed 2 subjects during the periods of 2008 and 2009, which led to him losing his status as a regular student in the field of information systems engineering. Agustina and Juan's relationship began during the global issue and was characterized by ups and downs. According to some of her family members, he exhibited psychological violence towards her and was controlling. However, the situation escalated in the summer of 2021, marked by more serious conflicts and violence perpetrated by Juan against Agustina. Her father shared that she was deeply affected by the relationship, but with the support of her family, she was able to rebuild her life and had no contact with him for a whole year. In September 2022, Agustina made the decision to move to Mexico, specifically to the beautiful beach town of Playa del Carmen in the Riviera Maya, to advance her modeling career. She rented an apartment and left her comfort zone in Argentina, creating some distance from Juan. In Mexico, Agustina worked as a hostess and engaged in modeling opportunities. Her dream was to travel the world while pursuing her modeling aspirations. She loved Playa del Carmen and felt genuinely happy there, quickly finding work and thriving. She built many friendships and had the support of a childhood friend who lived nearby, so she didn't feel alone. Additionally, she brought her dog, Bruna, along for emotional support. Agustina loved traveling, which was clear from her social media posts. She had visited amazing places like Brazil, New Zealand, China, and several European capitals such as Madrid, Paris, London, and Brussels, sharing her experiences with her 16,000 Instagram followers. She planned to move to Europe in the future. Meanwhile, her 21-year-old sister Candela came to spend the summer in Playa del Carmen to enjoy the beautiful beaches and be near Agustina. They chose to share Agustina's 2-bedroom apartment to stay comfortable. At the end of December, Agustina's ex-boyfriend Juan returned to her life for the holidays. They reconciled, and he began living with both Agustina and her sister, Candela. Candela was never comfortable with the idea of sharing their home with her sister's boyfriend, but things moved quickly, and soon he was staying in Agustina's room. In recent talks with her family, Agustina revealed that they had decided to get back together and that they planned to move to Spain. However, their relationship never seemed to maintain peace for long. On Thursday, February 16th, a serious argument broke out after Agostina discovered that her partner had been unfaithful. The tension in the apartment was high. The following day, February 17th, 2023, Candela left her sister alone with Juan. When Candela returned the next morning at 7 a.m., she found the door to her sister's apartment locked. She asked the building's doorman if there was a way to get inside. They informed her that they had heard screams and a fight coming from the apartment during the night, prompting the police to be called twice due to complaints from neighbors. Candela returned to the apartment and tried to enter using the access code, but it didn't work. The door was locked from the inside, so she knocked. After several attempts, Juan Reverter eventually answered the door and claimed that Agostina was sleeping. While Agostina and Candela were arguing, Agostina's small dog started barking. The dog, Bruna, led her to the bathroom, and there they found Agostina hanging from the towel rack, sitting or half-sitting, 3 feet off the floor with many bruises. They quickly untied her and brought her to the living room to administer CPR, but it was too late. Agostina was already dead. Candela then called the police. Forensic experts arrived to investigate the scene and took the body to the morgue, where an autopsy was conducted. The case was originally ruled to end one's own life and marked as closed. However, the Jalabert family believed that Agostina's death was actually a murder by her boyfriend, and they had valid reasons for this suspicion. In late February, Edgardo sent a letter to the Foreign Ministry. This letter, which reached the Minister of Foreign Affairs, urged Mexican authorities to take action and highlighted the family's feelings of helplessness regarding their daughter's death. Edgardo pointed out that the investigation was poorly conducted. Basic protocols were not followed. The boyfriend was not arrested. His phone was not seized. Toxicology tests were not performed, and no injuries were examined. Additionally, the family struggled to access the case details, despite the Argentine consulate's attempts to obtain records of the proceedings. These efforts were unsuccessful. Edgardo noted that the Foreign Ministry is required to investigate and address violence against women and to ensure the family receives clarity about Agostina's death. In this case, the ministry's involvement is crucial because, under the current investigation conditions in Mexico, Juan is free to act. Since Juan's legal status is not at risk, he is viewed as a person of interest rather than a fugitive. It's important to remember that both Agostina and Juan are Argentine citizens, and the Foreign Ministry must safeguard the rights of both, even if it turns out that Juan committed the crime alleged by Agostina's family. Colina, Agostina's mother, launched a media campaign to seek justice and pressure Mexican authorities. She spoke out about the abusive relationship between her daughter and her partner. In a televised interview, Colina claimed that Agostina was killed by her boyfriend and detailed how her daughter had been tortured, abused, and beaten, including receiving blows to the head before her death. Colina believed that he had faked the incident, making it look like Agostina hanged herself with a towel rack. She noted that Agostina had been dressed and ready to go out when Candela found her. According to Colina, no one who is considering end one's own life would take the time to get dressed. Colina recalled that Juan had a violent past. During a press conference shared on social media, she disclosed that Juan and Agostina had been facing ongoing issues that they had kept hidden. She expressed that she never trusted him and mentioned that 2 years earlier they had to rescue Agostina from the apartment she shared with Juan after he physically assaulted her. Colina emphasized that if they hadn't intervened that day, her daughter might have lost her life. Following that incident, Agostina decided not to report it, and her parents chose to respect her choice, even though they felt it was important to report such events to the authorities. The impact of not taking action at that time was felt 2 years later in Mexico. On Friday, February 17, at 2:30 p.m., Agostina sent a message to her mother expressing feelings of low self-worth and saying she didn't deserve to be with someone who would hurt her. Colina offered her support from a distance and encouraged Agostina to leave the apartment. Colina believed Agostina made a risky decision by going back to the violent man, which ultimately led to a bad outcome. Sadly, Juan Manuel's parents had reached out to the family and promised to help, but communication ceased when Juan failed to attend a scheduled Zoom meeting to explain his side of the story. Colina stated that Juan had been evading contact, but suspected he was still monitoring the situation to stay updated. She thought he would have shared his perspective if he had nothing to hide. Angry and frustrated, she claimed that Juan's parents were responsible for hiding what she saw as a monstrous act. On March 8th, International Women's Day, marches took place in Mexico and Argentina, demanding justice for Agostina. This intensified pressure on the Mexican prosecutor's office, which then announced an investigation into the death of the Argentine model as a potential femicide. The decision was influenced by the autopsy report, which revealed signs of head and facial injuries, multiple cuts on the body, and bruises indicating possible abuse. A forensic expert hired by the Jalabert family reviewed the official report and pointed out various signs of violence, including punch marks on the mouth and a significant head injury. The expert also noted cuts on several parts of the body, internal and external bruises, suggesting recent non-consensual abuse activity. Unfortunately, the only evidence available is this forensic report, because the Mexican authorities cremated Agostina's body shortly after classifying the case as an end one's own life. After the protests on International Women's Day, the Mexican justice system announced that it has reclassified the case. The family's lawyer confirmed that the case has been transferred to a specialized unit that deals with such matters. She accused the main suspect, Juan Reverter, of trying to stage a end one's own life case and pointed out signs of violence at the crime scene. The apartment was locked from the inside, and both the victim and her partner had visible injuries. A leg from a table was found out of place on the floor, and 2 calls were made to the police the night before. The lawyer criticized the judicial investigation, stating that the crime scene was not properly secured, which goes against established protocol. It is crucial that both the scene and the victim's body be preserved until the investigation is complete. She also noted that due to various mistakes, information that could have been accessed from the devices was lost, as the suspect took the cell phones and all related data with him. The investigation into Agostina's death in Mexico is proving to be difficult for her family, who are monitoring the situation from Argentina, over 7,000 kilometers away, facing different legal and cultural challenges. On March 13, 2023, the prosecutor from Quintana Roo stated during a press conference that Agostina, an Argentine model and influencer, had died by end her own life. He mentioned a history of violence in her relationship with her partner, raising the possibility that Juan may have played a role in her decision to take her life, which could now be part of the investigation. When asked by reporters about the cigarette burns found on Agostina's body, the prosecutor claimed those injuries were inflicted before her death. He indicated that there had been a violent incident between her and her partner the night prior, and there is substantial evidence to support this. The prosecutor mentioned that Juan had been questioned by the investigative police, but there was not enough evidence at that time for an arrest or any legal action against him. Nevertheless, this did not rule out the possibility of him being pursued later if connections to Agostina's death were uncovered. Edgardo, Agostina's father, argued for a change in how the case was classified, stating that their lawyer had found several pieces of evidence that warranted classifying it as femicide. German, the victim's uncle, noted that the Attorney General was pushing the end her own life theory because recognizing the evidence suggesting femicide would mean admitting to their shortcomings. He felt that the prosecution had acted carelessly and too quickly in the investigation's early phases, resulting in important evidence being lost. A journalist mentioned that the prosecutor's office would need to interview the boyfriend as part of the investigation, especially if the case leads to an end her own life. This means he will be required to provide statements to help clarify the situation. Additionally, the journalist noted that the crime was discovered over the weekend, a time when interns and junior investigators usually manage the inquiries in Mexico. This may have contributed to the mishandling of the case. He believes that their errors were not intentional but stemmed from inexperience, which impacted the way the investigation was conducted. A few days, news emerged in Argentina about a call received by Agostina's father, Edgardo. A prosecutor from Quintana Roo reached out to him at the request of the state prosecutor's office. They wanted to discuss the situation with the family. The caller expressed that the system wished to apologize for what had occurred. They assured that if Agostina's boyfriend was found responsible, they would pursue legal action, emphasizing that there was no intention to conceal anything by the prosecutor's office. They also stated that if any public official from the prosecutor's office was found accountable, appropriate actions would be taken. Additionally, the caller mentioned that they would arrange a meeting with the general prosecutor and a team of experts to show Edgardo the evidence they had. They clarified that the general prosecutor had directed other state agencies in Mexico to re-evaluate the autopsy as well. The latest update was provided at the end of March, just a few days before the one-month anniversary of Agostina's death. The case has been moved to the Women's Crimes Division, which means Agostina's case is now being treated as one involving femicide and gender violence. The lawyer is collaborating with the prosecutor assigned to the case and is focusing on gathering evidence to support the femicide angle, as well as examining Juan's potential involvement. She expressed regret for not being able to share more information, but indicated that all evidence related to the murder is currently sealed. The lawyer explained that Juan's arrest timeline will depend on the investigation's findings. It is the prosecutor's responsibility to decide whether there is enough evidence or if additional evidence is required. Despite this, the lawyer expressed confidence in her ability to prove their case. The Mexican justice system has not issued an arrest warrant for him, and no legal actions have been initiated in Argentina since the alleged crime took place in another country. While he is not in custody, he has kept a low profile and has not confronted the family of the girlfriend he reportedly loved and lived with until her death. This case is still being developed, and since it is at an early stage, many processes are being carried out privately and out of the public eye. The prosecutor's office, which is investigating the suspected femicide, has issued a document to find Juan Reverter. This order, issued on June 7, 2023, by the Specialized Prosecutor's Office, focused on femicide cases, aims to search for and locate Juan and ask him to come in for questioning without taking away his freedom. The goal is to conduct a more thorough interview to gather additional information and meet the requirements set by the authorities. Diaz met Jared James Deacus while working at Cheppy's Meat Market, a local grocery store in Taqueria, Texas. At the time, Angie was a 21-year-old immigrant from Nicaragua who had come to the U.S. seeking a better life for herself and her family. Jared, also 21, had recently started working at the same store. The two quickly grew close. Angie is impressed with Jared's friendly personality and hard-working spirit, which harmonizes well with her responsibility and maturity, as she is the eldest of 4 siblings. During their work breaks, they would talk and laugh about their dreams and future plans. To her, Jared is a reliable support and brings her comfort, having left Nicaragua and her family behind, particularly her mother, who was battling cancer. Angie longed for someone to share her struggles and aspirations with. Her devotion to her family and determination to provide for them drove her to work multiple jobs, and Jared's companionship filled her with hope. Their friendship at work soon blossomed into a romantic relationship. Outside of work, they grew closer by sharing meals and discussing their goals. To those around them, Angie and Jared seemed like a happy and loving young couple, trying to build a future together in America. She had recently achieved a significant personal goal, becoming a fitness coach, a testament to her dedication and perseverance. Angie's co-workers at Cheppy's Meat Market often remarked on her joy when she was with Jared. Her boss, Veronica Jimenez, noted how she would brighten up when talking about him and described her as being incredibly happy in her relationship. However, as their relationship became more serious, small changes in Angie's behavior began to indicate that not everything was going smoothly. While these shifts were initially dismissed as normal life stresses, they began to raise concerns among her loved ones. Jared proposed to Angie after months of dating, and she was thrilled to accept. Marriage symbolized not just love, but also stability and partnership, which Angie hoped would help her continue supporting her family in Nicaragua. Their engagement was full of excitement as they planned for their future. On October 22, 2022, they tied the knot in a wedding ceremony officiated by Waller County Judge Trey Duhon, who later described them as a kind and loving young couple. Friends and family came together to celebrate what seemed to be the start of a happy, secure future for the pair. After their wedding, Angie and Jared decided to move into a small cabin on Jared's parents' property on Oak Hollow Boulevard in Waller County, Texas. This provided affordable housing as they worked on building their financial foundation as a couple. For Angie, who regularly sent money back to Nicaragua, the arrangement was practical. She balanced her job at Cheppy's Meat Market with her fitness coaching career, earning consistent praise from her manager, Ruth Armendariz, for her dedication and positive attitude. Co-workers described her as hardworking, energetic, and highly ambitious. However, cracks began to show in their seemingly happy relationship. While Angie kept up her cheerful persona, her boss, Veronica Jimenez, noticed subtle changes. Veronica recalled that some days Angie seemed different, explaining that she appeared tired. Though it wasn't clear whether it was because of work or her relationship, Jared's arrest for driving under the influence just a month into their marriage was the first major warning sign. The incident occurred at a Whataburger restaurant, where employees called the police after Jared became aggressive and tried to force his way inside. Responding officers described him as belligerent and locked him out of the building. During a search of his car, police found a partially full bottle of Bud Light. Jared admitted to taking pills but couldn't specify the medication. Beyond the legal consequences, this event revealed aspects of Jared's behavior Angie likely had not fully understood before their marriage. The situation worsened during Jared's booking process, where his aggressive behavior escalated. Court records showed Jared threatened both the arresting officers and jail staff. His actions became so disruptive that he punched windows and had to be restrained in a chair for safety. This incident highlighted a troubling pattern of aggression that would later become even more significant. As time passed, friends and family noticed more worrying signs in Angie and Jared's marriage. While Angie had seemed very happy at first, her demeanor changed after the wedding. At social gatherings, friends saw a difference in her, though she never openly complained or sought help. One notable incident occurred at a Christmas party in December 2022, just weeks before Angie's death. Friends said that she and Jared left the party abruptly, and Jared looked very upset. Although this worried everyone, no one realized the true severity of the problem. During this period, law enforcement had been called to their home multiple times for domestic disturbances. While Waller County Sheriff Troy Guidry noted that these calls didn't involve extreme violence, they reflected ongoing conflict within the marriage. An unnamed friend of Angie later revealed that Jared had displayed possessive behavior during their marriage. He was described as jealous, and one particular social media post stood out, where Jared had written that she was his. The friend found it unsettling, commenting that no one had questioned their relationship, making the post seem unnecessary. Such possessiveness is often a warning sign of potential domestic violence. Despite the warning signs, Angie seemed determined to stay in her marriage. Her friends later speculated that she might have been too embarrassed to admit her relationship was struggling. This hesitation to seek help or openly talk about relationship issues is sadly common among domestic violence victims, who often feel ashamed or believe they can manage the situation on their own. What made Angie's story especially tragic was her unwavering devotion to her family in Nicaragua. Despite facing difficulties in her marriage, she worked 2 jobs to help fund her mother's cancer treatment, showcasing her selflessness and dedication. Her co-workers at Cheppy's Meat Market and Takaria described her as someone who always put others first and aimed to improve not just her own life, but her entire family's well-being. By January 2023, tensions in Angie and Jared's marriage were clearly escalating. While the specifics of their private arguments remain unknown, it was evident that underlying issues were coming to a dangerous head. Angie, who had immigrated to the U.S. with hope and determination, found herself trapped in a marriage that had become increasingly volatile and unsafe. On the morning of January 11th, 2023, surveillance footage captured Jared at Angie's workplace around 11:40 a.m. The video showed him entering the store, grabbing a beer, and leaving without paying. Even more alarming, he was seen drinking the beer in his car before driving away. This illegal act and erratic behavior suggested Jared was in a highly unstable mental state, possibly reflecting or preparing for what was to come. The footage provided critical insight, revealing a man acting irrationally just hours before an unthinkable crime. Jared's casual theft, his reckless drinking behind the wheel, and his escalating instability painted a picture of someone whose judgment was severely impaired. These actions foreshadowed a tragedy that would devastate two families and shock the Waller County community. Later that day, at approximately 4:35 p.m., Jared's parents made a 911 call that would change lives forever. They reported a possible death at their property, specifically inside the small cabin where Jared and Angie lived. Sheriff Troy Guidry later said Jared's father contacted authorities shortly after Jared entered the main house and made a disturbing comment, causing them to worry about Angie's safety. When Waller County deputies arrived, they encountered what Sheriff Troy described as a horrific scene. Inside the cabin, they found Angie's lifeless body near the bed, amidst evidence of extreme violence. She had suffered multiple stab wounds to her back, and the brutality of the attack was shocking. Blood was splattered throughout the cabin, and investigators discovered her body on the floor near the bed in a pool of blood. Disturbingly, her severed head was found in the shower. The severity of the violence left even seasoned law enforcement officers horrified. Crime scene investigators determined that a kitchen knife was used in the attack. Sheriff Troy confirmed that everything occurred on the property, and all evidence was recovered and submitted. The events of that day marked one of the most horrendous crimes in Waller County's history, leaving an indelible mark on the community and on everyone who knew Angie. The brutal and calculated nature of the violence, along with the disposal of Angie's body, shocked investigators. When deputies arrived at the crime scene, they found Jared still present on the property. Rather than fleeing or hiding his actions, he stayed at the location where he had committed the horrific crime. Jared and his parents were taken in for questioning, but it quickly became evident that Jared was solely responsible for the violent act. During his initial interview, Jared gave what Sheriff Troy described as a complete and straightforward confession, admitting to murdering his wife, Angie. While he described what he had done, he offered no explanation or motive for the senseless brutality. Jared confessed to killing Angie in their shared home. However, the lack of a clear motive left investigators and the community stunned. It was incomprehensible that a 21-year-old man could commit such a heinous act against his wife, whom he had married just 3 months earlier. The randomness and cruelty of the crime contradicted everything people believed about Jared and his relationship with Angie. The investigation revealed further disturbing details about the incident of January 11, 2023. Evidence indicated that Angie had fought desperately for her life. Multiple stab wounds to her back suggested that she had tried to flee or defend herself during the attack. Adding to the heartbreak was the discovery that Angie had reportedly been living in fear in the weeks leading up to her death. Prior calls to law enforcement hinted at rising tensions within the home, though no one had anticipated such a horrifying conclusion. For Angie's family in Nicaragua, the loss was beyond devastating. She had left her home country to create a better life and support her family's medical expenses, but her dreams ended in an unimaginable tragedy. Her mother, already battling cancer, now faced the overwhelming grief of losing her eldest daughter. The crime scene investigation lasted several days as law enforcement meticulously gathered evidence to piece together what had happened in the cabin that afternoon. Although the physical evidence detailed the brutal tragedy, the deeper psychological and emotional factors behind Jared's actions remained unclear. When Jared was charged with murder and booked into the Waller County Jail, the community began to confront the reality of how domestic violence could escalate to such a serious level. Although there had been prior warnings, including domestic disturbance reports and concerning behavior from Jared, no one foresaw the violence that ultimately unfolded. The investigation also shed light on Angie's life and the dreams that were tragically cut short. Friends and colleagues shared memories of her ambition, dedication to her family, and pride in her work as a fitness coach. Her untimely death felt even more tragic, as it robbed her of a bright future and a positive impact she had been making on those around her. As the trial progresses, many questions remain about Jared's motive for committing this horrific crime. Although further details about Jared's mental state and behavior emerged during the investigation, the fundamental question of why this tragedy occurred remained only partially answered. With Jared in custody and having confessed to the crime, attention turned to the legal process that would decide his fate. However, no outcome could restore the life lost or ease the grief of Angie's loved ones, who had envisioned a brighter future for her in America. The case immediately raised important questions about domestic violence, mental health, and the systems meant to protect vulnerable individuals. Just months before the crime, Jared had been arrested for DWI and exhibited violent behavior during that incident, yet no system intervened to prevent him from continuing to pose a threat to Angie. Following his arrest and confession, investigators closely examined Jared's background and mental health to understand what led to the tragedy. During the pre-trial phase, Jared's mental health and competency to stand trial became significant concerns. The Waller County Criminal District Attorney's Office acknowledged questions about his mental state. This prompted a court-ordered psychiatric evaluation to determine if Jared could comprehend the charges and participate in his defense. After a thorough assessment, the psychiatrist concluded that, despite any mental health issues, Jared was competent to stand trial. This determination allowed the legal process to proceed, holding Jared fully accountable for his actions. Initially, he was held on a $500,000 bond, but Waller County Criminal District Attorney Sean G. Whitmore argued that this amount was inadequate given the severity of the crime. Citing the brutal nature of Angie's murder and Jared's history of violent behavior, Sean petitioned for the bond to be increased to $1 million. The district attorney's request was supported by Jared's past actions, including his threats against police officers and jail staff during his arrest 2 months prior. These incidents highlighted Jared's violent tendencies, especially under stress or the influence of substances, and emphasized the public safety risk he posed. After hearing both sides, the judge approved raising the bond to $1 million and ordered an additional mental health evaluation to further assess Jared's psychological state before trial. As legal proceedings moved forward, District Attorney Whitmore worked closely with Angie's family to understand their feelings and priorities. While grieving and organizing the repatriation of Angie's remains to Nicaragua, the family expressed a desire for justice without enduring a prolonged and painful trial. Prosecutors and defense attorneys began discussions on a plea agreement that could resolve the case without a trial. This agreement aimed to secure a significant prison sentence for Jared while sparing Angie's family the trauma of revisiting the tragic details in court. The negotiations were challenging, requiring a balance between the severity of the crime, the legal process, and the family's wishes. Prosecutors sought a resolution that acknowledged the heinous nature of the crime while offering closure to those grieving Angie. Meanwhile, the community grappled with the broader implications of the tragedy. Domestic violence advocates used the case to raise awareness about recognizing warning signs and supporting individuals in potentially dangerous relationships. The multiple visits by law enforcement to Jared and Angie's home before the murders were a clear warning that domestic violence can escalate over time and often leads to serious consequences. On July 31, 2024, more than a year after Angie's death, Jared James Deacus appeared in court before Judge Gary Cheney to finalize a plea agreement that resolved the case. Jared pleaded guilty to murdering his wife, resulting in a 40-year prison sentence in the Texas Department of Criminal Justice Institutional Division. As part of this agreement, Jared gave up his right to appeal the verdict, waived potential defenses, including insanity, and forfeited his ability to file future habeas corpus petitions. This significantly reduces his chances of appealing his sentence. Jared will not be eligible for parole until at least 2043, meaning he is set to spend decades behind bars. As District Attorney of Whitmore County explained, being eligible does not mean being guaranteed a pardon. If denied, Jared could spend even more time in prison. Angie's family was heavily consulted throughout the process to ensure their wishes were respected. They agreed to the plea deal, believing it honored Angie's memory and allowed them the closure needed to begin healing. At the sentencing, the emotional toll on Angie's family and community was evident. District Attorney Whitmore reiterated Waller County's commitment to combating domestic violence, stating that Waller County does not tolerate domestic violence and that crimes like this would not go unanswered. He emphasized that they would fight for victims and hold perpetrators accountable. He also praised the Waller County Sheriff's Office for their thorough investigation and commitment to justice. For Angie's family, the sentencing marked the end of a painful legal process, but also the beginning of the long road to healing. While nothing could bring Angie back, knowing Jared was held accountable brought a measure of justice. At the same time, they faced the challenge of rebuilding their lives while carrying the weight of their loss. This case highlighted the devastating impact of domestic violence and the importance of recognizing warning signs, such as the concerning behavior Jared exhibited before the murder, missed opportunities to intervene, such as prior police calls to their home, Jared's violent actions during a DWI arrest, and reports of possessive behavior underscored the need for greater awareness and proactive measures. In the aftermath, community groups and domestic violence advocates used Angie's story to educate others about the warning signs of abusive relationships and resources available to those at risk. Her tragic death became a catalyst for discussions about protecting vulnerable individuals and preventing similar tragedies. The case also shed light on the complex relationship between mental health and criminal accountability. While Jared's mental health was acknowledged during the trial, the court deemed him competent and held him fully responsible for his actions. This affirmed the principle that mental health challenges cannot excuse or justify acts of violence, even when they provide context for the behavior. When Jared began his sentence, Angie's family focused on honoring her memory and supporting others facing similar struggles. They collaborated with community organizations to raise awareness about domestic violence and ensured Angie's story served as both a warning and inspiration for change. While the legal system brought justice in this case, the ultimate goal should be prevention, protecting young women like Angie before they fall victim to such violence. Those who knew Angie remember her as a hopeful, ambitious young woman who loved her family deeply. Her tragic death, at just 21, represents not only a personal loss to her loved ones, but also a collective loss to the community. Angie's dreams, dedication to supporting her family, and success as a fitness coach highlight the bright future taken from her. Ultimately, she will not be remembered solely as a victim of domestic violence, but as a determined, hard-working young woman who came to America seeking a better life for herself and her family. District Attorney Whitmore emphasized that they would seek justice for victims of domestic violence and send a message to perpetrators that in their jurisdiction, they fight for their victims. Angie's case, he noted,
underscores both the critical need for this fight and the devastating consequences of unchecked violence. He stated that her memory would continue to inspire efforts to prevent such tragedies and assist those in need of safety and support to escape dangerous situations.
Hi everyone, thanks for returning. Let's unravel another horrible case. The case of Sarah Harris. Sarah Harris is an intelligent and attractive young woman. She is energetic and kind. Her beauty even helped her win the Miss Maryland title during her school years. Sarah dreams of helping others and aims to build a career in the medical field, specifically as an anesthesiologist. In 2020, at the age of 20, she went to a private dental clinic and met Dr. James Ryan, a famous and respected dentist who has achieved great success in his profession and is a well-regarded figure in the medical community during her treatment. Sarah and James became close friends and kept in touch with each other. After completing her treatment, James invited her to work at the private clinic where she had been treated. She worked as an assistant, and over time, a romantic relationship developed between them. To outsiders, Sarah appeared charming and confident, but those who knew her well recognized her as a kind and friendly person. Unfortunately, this did not prevent the tragic turn of events that followed. On the morning of January 26, 2022, James called 911, reporting that his girlfriend had overdosed. During the call, he sounded panicked. He said that he had performed CPR, but Sarah's chest was not rising. When the police arrived, they found James crying and trying his best to resuscitate Sarah, who was lying on the floor and not breathing. There were no visible wounds or injuries on her body, and she was dead. Before the paramedics arrived, James assumed it was an overdose, but it was unclear whether it was accidental or intentional. The police began to piece together a timeline of events based on James's account on the evening of January 25, 2022. Sarah fell asleep on the living room sofa, which was not unusual for her that night while they were watching TV. Sarah reminded James that she had to work the next day and that it was time to go to bed. She lay down on the sofa while James went into the bedroom. When James woke up, he got up and went to check on Sarah. When he reached the living room, he found her lying on the floor and was horrified to realize that she was not breathing. He called emergency services and attempted to resuscitate her, but it was too late. Despite his best efforts, he was unable to save her. James admitted that he had put her on an IV to help her detox and had sought professionals to assist her in dealing with her addiction. He also revealed that he had caught her injecting herself on several occasions. James stated that Sarah suffered from bipolar disorder, which may have affected how she managed her mental health challenges. Sarah experienced frequent mood swings. She could feel very happy one moment and then suddenly start crying or become very angry and aggressive the next. On the morning of Sarah's death, James informed her family and shared the news with her mother. He relayed the details to the police, but her mother found it hard to believe what he said. She believed her daughter would not be addicted to illegal substances. During a search of the couple's home, police found several empty syringes, ligatures, and saline solution bags in the kitchen near the sink. Similar items were also found next to Sarah's body and in her room, along with several vials of medication that James had mentioned. Additionally, some of these items were discovered in her purse and closet. It appears that Sarah was a regular user of narcotics, however. Sarah's mother, Tina Harris, claimed that James had orchestrated the incident to make it appear as if it were an accidental overdose. At this point, Sarah and James had been dating for a year and a half. James was much older than Sarah, nearly twice her age, with over 20 years of private practice. James was a respected and well-known physician in the area from the beginning. Tina did not approve of her daughter dating an older man. She felt embarrassed by the large age gap, as James was old enough to be Sarah's father. Despite Tina's concerns, Sarah was determined to pursue the relationship, which Tina believed would be harmful to her daughter. Their relationship began in the summer of 2020. Shortly after Sarah scheduled a wisdom tooth appointment, James, the dentist, quickly took an interest in Sarah and asked for her phone number to stay in touch after a few extractions. He began texting her to check in and see how she was doing. Sarah was initially distant, but Dr. James persisted, complimenting her and eventually getting her to respond more warmly. When James mentioned that he was looking for an assistant, he and Sarah were in daily contact. Tina had long suspected that James was trying to form a romantic relationship with her daughter. However, Tina did not think James posed any threat. He was a respected and decent man with a good reputation. James was divorced, had 3 grown children, and 1 child from one of his employees. He was wealthy and could provide for any woman. Many people considered him a charming man who liked to conquer beautiful women. Sarah then applied for a job, but James said he did not need one. The next day, he came to work to see her. Sarah dismissed her mother's concerns about their age difference, asserting that a romantic relationship with Dr. James was out of the question. She insisted that their interactions were purely business and friendly. Sarah believed that her mother, Tina, was being overly cautious. She thought that James's interest in her was purely professional and that they were not a couple. However, the following Christmas, he surprised Sarah with an expensive gift, a luxurious diamond ring. This action clearly went beyond the scope of their work and friendship. Later, Tina believed that James had sincere feelings for her daughter. Sarah promised her mother that she would be cautious and not become involved with a 47-year-old man. However, in early 2021, she agreed to go out to dinner with him. This led to a series of dates that suggested a developing romantic relationship. She often talked to her sisters and mother about James, even convincing Tina that he was a genuinely nice person. His resume was impressive, and he was generous. He gave Sarah a car when they started dating and paid for all their expenses. They traveled together, sometimes with Sarah's relatives, and even lived together. This made the family feel more comfortable and confident about James's serious intentions. Sarah was in regular contact with her loved ones. During this time, she shared only positive things about James, which allayed their suspicions. However, this happiness did not last long. The police spoke to Sarah's family and discovered that she had been going through a challenging period in her life. Her younger sister, Rachel, who is closest to her, reveals that Sarah is experiencing typical teenage problems. She had experimented with mild drugs, which eventually led to anxiety and depression starting around the age of 14. During this difficult time, Sarah experienced feelings of depression. However, she managed to complete her education and developed a deep interest in languages. She learned several languages, including sign language, but her mental health struggles made communication difficult. As a result, she only interacted with family and trusted friends. This continued at least until a music festival in 2018, where Sarah met a guy and his band who were performing at the event. They immediately felt a connection, which led to them starting to communicate. However, a significant problem arose because he lived an hour away from Sarah. They kept in touch via messaging apps, sharing their dreams of getting married and having children. Unfortunately, the distance caused their feelings to fade over time. They eventually drifted apart and decided to stay in touch as friends. He was the first to end their romantic relationship, but he confessed that he still had feelings for Sarah. He just felt that a long-distance relationship was unrealistic during this time. Sarah was actively involved in the modeling industry and participated in beauty pageants, eventually winning the title of Miss Maryland 2020 a year later. She met James in late summer 2021. Tina noticed that James had a huge influence on her daughter. He was her boss at work, her boyfriend at home, and Sarah even moved in with him. As a result, Sarah's behavior changed dramatically. Instead of growing, she seemed increasingly depressed. She eventually saw a psychiatrist who diagnosed her with bipolar disorder. During this time, she began to lose weight, and her skin looked unhealthy. To help ease the situation, in September 2021, James, Sarah, and her mother planned a family trip to relax. During the trip, James, while drunk, shared a disturbing story with Tina. He revealed that he had seen Sarah when she was 14 years old. At that time, she was walking in the park with her friends and was noticed for her beauty. He knew where she worked at a toy store and often visited her with his children to admire her. Sarah often dressed up as different cartoon characters. But the time that impressed James the most was when she dressed up as Elsa. He later learned that Sarah had changed jobs and was now working part-time at a restaurant. From that point on, he often went to the restaurant for dinner. Hoping to see Sarah, Tina was surprised and thought that James was completely infatuated with her daughter. However, at that time, there was no evidence that James had any bad intentions towards Sarah. He seemed very loving, attentive, and caring. The situation changed during the next trip to Florida, which took place about a month later. Despite the heat, Sarah wore a long-sleeved sweater, suggesting that she might be trying to hide something. She and James argued frequently. Sarah even confided in her mother that she no longer loved him, did not want to continue the relationship, and imagined breaking up with him. This worried her mother greatly after the family returned to Maryland. Disturbing incidents began to occur repeatedly. On October 28, 2021, Sarah called her mother, but Tina did not understand what her daughter was trying to say. Sarah spoke incoherently, making it difficult for her mother to grasp the message. Concerned, Tina went to Sarah's house with Rachel. What they discovered was alarming. Sarah had become so thin that they barely recognized her. The house was a disturbing sight, with needles and powder bags scattered across the floor, as well as syringes, ligatures, and bloody tissues everywhere. Tina took numerous photos of her daughter's living conditions and quickly blamed James for Sarah's condition. She tried to calm her mother down and convince her not to call the police. Tina agreed not to report the situation, only if Sarah returned home, where they could care for her for a few days. The family members noticed positive changes as her skin became healthier. She cooked and even went to church. However, it wasn't long before James convinced Sarah to return to him. On December 20, Sarah called her mother again, but mumbled something incomprehensible. Concerned, Tina went to James's house, where she discovered an even more alarming situation. There were numerous syringes and vials of various substances, as well as a tripod for IV drips. Frustrated by the chaos, Tina turned around and left without speaking to her daughter. A few days later, she met James, but did not listen to his explanations or excuses. Instead, she immediately punched him in the face, accusing him of giving Sarah illegal drugs. She dismissed his claim that he was actually trying to help her overcome her addiction. Tina warned James that if he did not break up with Sarah soon, she would have to contact the police. He said he would do this within a few days. However, Sarah did not return home even after 2 months. Tina was so upset that she considered taking her daughter by force and locking her in the house to keep her away from James and any drugs. When Tina shared this plan with Sarah, her daughter replied that if that happened, she would leave as soon as she got out and would never see her family again. This frightened Tina, and she decided not to carry out her plan. A few weeks later, tragedy struck the family when Sarah's brother suddenly died of a heart attack at the age of 38. Tina endured the traumatic experience of signing the documents to disconnect her son from life support. On January 26, 2022, at 8:30 a.m., James called Tina to inform her that Sarah had died of a drug overdose. At the time of her death, Sarah weighed only 38 kilograms. She contacted her ex-boyfriend 3 months before her death. In her messages, she sounded distressed, as if she were saying goodbye forever. After January 2022, Sarah stopped contacting him completely, concerned for her well-being. Sarah's ex-lover decided to look up information about her and discovered that she had died. He immediately called her mother, Tina, to find out what had happened. After hearing about Sarah's death, her ex-lover was convinced that James was responsible. The police were planning to drop the case, and Sarah's family began to fight for justice. The fact that potent medical drugs were found at the scene of Sarah's death. The police trusted James, the reputable doctor, and did not secure the crime scene to collect evidence. It seemed that Sarah's family was facing significant challenges, but Sarah's sister, Rachel, was determined to find evidence of James's wrongdoing. She investigated Sarah's laptop, which the police had overlooked. Rachel was unsure of the exact password, but after a few days, she successfully remembered it because she was familiar with her sister's habits. Rachel discovered numerous text messages exchanged between James and Sarah, some of which referred to drugs, including sedatives and 2 fast-acting surgical anesthetics. There was also information about less potent substances that Sarah appeared to have used. Rachel took numerous photographs of the house where her sister lived with James, along with documents that their mother had previously collected. In total, the correspondence amounted to approximately 200 pages of printed evidence. All of the drugs were listed in the coroner's autopsy report. It was known that these substances were addictive, caused difficulty in breathing in, and that their combined use could be fatal without medical supervision. However, since the case was considered an accident, the dosage found in Sarah's body was not recorded. In February 2022, the documents were turned over to the police. Through messages found on Sarah's laptop, they were able to piece together the events leading up to her death, which occurred about a month after she began dating James. Sarah had mentioned struggling with mental health issues and constant anxiety. Initially, James suggested an injection that would quickly relieve her symptoms. However, over the following months, Sarah became severely addicted to the drug. The messages show that she not only asked James to bring her illegal drugs, but also sought to obtain them without his permission. During this time, she also asked James to give her an injection of drugs. They discussed painkillers in October 2021, syringes in November, and by December, she was simply asking for something to help her sleep, which required a strong anesthetic injection. It seemed all she had to do was call James, and he would bring home the necessary medical supplies. Sarah began regular painkiller injections in December 2021, and the last text message mentioning the drug was sent just a day before her death, according to the police handling Sarah's case. The initial investigation was ineffective because officers were not equipped to address the medical aspects of the situation in James's home. There were multiple ampules of medication and liquids that the police considered non-lethal, especially since they were handled by medically trained individuals who knew what they were doing. This caused confusion. On March 22, 2022, nearly 2 months after Sarah's death, James was arrested for murder. From the start, the case posed challenges for the prosecution due to the lack of direct evidence. Relying instead on circumstantial evidence and text messages exchanged between the couple, James's defense argued that he was trying to save Sarah's life, not end it. With this background, they could have proven that he had committed manslaughter. However, the case faced significant obstacles, making the chances of success slim. As a result, prosecutors decided to charge James with second-degree murder, aiming to prove that he was aware of the potential danger his actions posed. Rather than proving that he intended to kill, this approach seemed more reasonable because James would have been aware of the risks involved in administering these substances to Sarah. Additionally, James faced charges in 2 cases involving the distribution and possession of illegal drugs with intent to distribute. The prosecution aimed to portray James as a domineering husband who tried to control Sarah through drugs. A significant portion of the prosecution's evidence was based on text messages exchanged between James and Sarah, which were found by Rachel. Lawyers argued that Sarah had mental health issues that may have played a role in her death. Shortly before her death, she wrote to her ex-boyfriend, expressing that she had lost all interest in life. There were signs that she not only sought out drugs, but also began stealing them, which left James unable to effectively manage her addiction. James was unable to monitor her constantly, and she eventually took advantage of his absence at night to use drugs, which created a dangerous combination. James claimed that he was trying to protect her and manage her addiction while also seeking a solution to the problem. Unfortunately, he ran out of time before she overdosed. James's lawyer highlighted several errors made during the initial investigation. The police failed to collect all of the medical supplies and items for fingerprint testing. The defense argued that Sarah had long struggled with addiction and that several witnesses had seen her injecting herself with suspicious drugs. However, correspondence showed that James had introduced her to drugs and had regularly injected her. Ultimately, on August 25, 2023, the jury deliberated and found James Ryan guilty of second-degree murder and other charges. At the subsequent hearing, where the final verdict was announced, James's attorney presented testimony from patients, co-workers, and acquaintances who believed James was innocent. Despite this support, the court sentenced James to 45 years in prison.